Meow. Meow.
Hey meow.
Meow.
What's up, everybody? Hi, Adam. Hi, chat. We're joined here by Twitter Sucks. Oh my God, look at this guy.
Hello, chat.
What's up, Twitter Sucks?
I'm bringing this voice back again.
You sound like who do you sound like?
Droopy Dan.
It sounds kind of no, it's like someone else. It's like another card. Anyway, don't worry about
Droopy
it. So
Dog.
he does sound kind of like a droopy dog a little bit. You got Adam. You have a giant anti-communist sign on screen, which I guess
I
is
know.
appropriate, right?
Yeah, we're talking about property rights, right?
That's true. That's a good
I
point.
didn't really. You didn't
Communism
really.
sucks.
True.
Yeah, exactly. So what's you wanted to come on yesterday, but we ran out of time talking about other stuff. So, well,
Yeah,
what do you want to talk about?
So I'll start off with just as a joke. There's a new counter protest to Pride right now. It's called the Trump Pride. Have you seen it?
No.
Oh my God, it's hilarious. It's Trump protest or like Trump supporters wearing like massive Trump merch and waving Trump flags protesting LGBT pride.
Okay. They should
I
wear
thought
like rainbow stuff too,
I
which
thought
is
I would
also like a MAGA hat.
thought I'd say that as a funny like
Mhm.
quip at the beginning just to
Mm.
make this conversation light, because there were on your Sunday stream, Adam, you said that you were confused as to how leftists define property, and I was curious to know if
Well,
both of
first
you.
of all, I would never say that I was confused because I'm not really confused about anything. So
That's fair. That's fair.
I mean, I might have said that leftists are
Don't understand it.
confused themselves
There you
about
go.
how
That's
to
that's
define
probably what you said.
property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Which they are constantly.
I was really curious to know if both of you have heard of this. Oh, I don't know how to call this. Not a dichotomy, but I guess we'll call it a hypocrisy of the difference between personal and public property.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've heard that for a
Okay.
million years now. They constantly trot that out. Oh, you don't know the difference between personal and private property. Private property is property that you use to generate income, and personal property is things that you own personally that you don't generate income off of. That's the distinction.
Now, have you heard of this new edition called, well, I don't want to say new. It's not necessarily new. It's been around for a couple of years. Real property.
So they've added some new addition, real property.
So I researching this again because you brought up this conversation. It would have been like over almost 6 months ago now, where I'm trying to remember exactly your guys' definition between Hitler's socialism and fascism. And if I'm going to try to remember this correctly, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, your claim was that fascism was right wing, but Hitler's socialism wasn't. Am I remembering this correctly?
No.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
Not even close.
Can you guys restate your definition for me, just so I'm like not running off of the wrong Sitch's law here?
For Nazism?
Yeah. I'm trying to run on the policy that Hitler's socialism, like Hitler's Nazi party, was socialist.
Yeah, it was, but the ethno-nationalist component makes them right wing.
Well, wait, I mean, I don't know.
Estimation, so
they weren't okay. So I mean, we had Dev on, and he talked about this. And he was saying how like during when Nazism was spreading, there were two factions, and there was a faction. They were both kind of ethno-nationalists, but there was a faction that was much more like actually economically socialist. I forget the guys' names that were kind of the head of this faction. And then there was Hitler, who wasn't really, I mean, obviously he did not like socialism, and he wasn't really an economic socialist, and he was more interested in like the ethno-nationalist element of it. And his faction of the Nazi party won. And so even if it still had like the original name from the beginning, I don't believe that, I could be wrong, but I don't believe the Nazis really engaged in like that many economic socialist practices. I thought they were more engaged in the economic fascistic practices.
Well, here's a good question. Do you think socialists have a monopoly on the term socialism?
I mean, anyone could technically call themselves anything, I guess, right? But we have to make a a determination to say, okay, well, this is kind of what this term means, and do we think that this group of people, fits this categorization, right? So like we would understand, like we don't really think of, the People's Republic of North Korea or whatever, the People's Democracy, whatever
The
it's called. Like
Democratic People's
thank you, the
Republic
Democratic
of
People's
North
Republic. Yeah, like
Korea, all
we
right?
understand that,
The
like they
forced
call themselves
democratic.
that, right? They call themselves that, but we understand that they're not, like they're not really, a
Yeah, you look
democratic
them up on the
country.
democracy index and they've
Right,
got like a 1.5.
So
right.
you're saying that the jingoistic policy is more of an appropriate definition of Nazism than socialism.
Well, so again, okay, so the socialist economic idea is, at least nowadays, kind of seems to break into two categories. There's the, like, no one owns any sort of private property. The government owns everything, quote, slash, everything is public property. And that's about it. And or there's kind of the newer form of socialism that the kiddies now are spreading, where like you can still own your own personal property, but there can't be any like capital ownership. No one can quote own a company themselves. It has to all be, worker co-ops essentially. It's kind of like the two economic systems of socialism. Socialism, it seems like, where fascism, at least classical fascism, the economic idea was that you could still have private property, but each company and each industry had to be working in unison towards the health of the country. And there'd be some kind of like communication from the government to the workers to the owners of the businesses. And they'd all try to like work in unison for the health of the company to create this is where the term, what was it? Corporatism comes from, that each industry is supposed to be like part of the body and like an organ in the body working towards some sort of joint, collection, right? And I don't know exactly where Nazi Germany was on the economic scale, what kind of policies they were, implementing, because usually we kind of focus heavily on the social policies of Nazism.
So the reason why I wanted to have this debate is because I feel like the economic policy more defines Nazism over the nationalistic policy. I guess you could, well, jingoism. I use the term
Hold
jingoism.
on, what is the debate that you wanted to have? Just real quick.
The debate that I disagree with you guys is that the fascistic policy of Nazism is socialist.
So this is not really about property rights. This is more about like, you want to say that the Nazis are left wing.
Yes.
Okay.
And
We encounter this quite often.
because of their private property laws. I guess you could say
Okay.
their lack of.
Okay.
And I'm curious to know where we differ, because
What
the
were what were their private property laws? Because I'm not super familiar.
they abolished them essentially. They're
Mm-hmm.
the fire decree. I always misremember it. The Weimar fire decree or something like that. It was the constitution of Germany at the time that established private property laws. Those were abolished in order to establish state union, renting and product pricing restrictions. They basically subsidized the farming industry. You were forced to be a farmer. You couldn't sell your farmland.
Before we get too far into this, can I ask you why it's important to you that the Nazis are on the left and not on the right?
Mainly because socialism defined their entire policy.
Yeah, but is it okay? But can there be right wing socialists?
I would say to some degree, no. There's a way that I think you could argue that position where, and this is why I was trying to make the distinction earlier between nationalism and socialism,
Mm-hmm.
is if you define it in a way that makes nationalism the leading policy over socialism. But due to the fact that when Hitler was gaining power in the 30s, the first thing that he did when he gained power was eliminate the two articles that established private property in Germany.
Sure, but like, so I watched this documentary that was on the is like a more extreme version of the Mormon church. And I forget what they're called, like the FLDS or something. And even though like so they're all like super obviously they're very socially conservative, they're very religious. Um, they practice polygamy. And but they have this thing where like you technically don't own anything. Like if you anger the church, they can tell you to leave and you just have to like leave everything. Like you have to leave your home, your job. You literally have to leave your wives, right? You don't own anything. You just get kicked out of this community and you lose everything. And so it's like, okay, so technically in that community, they don't have private property, but that's not like socialist and it's definitely not left wing. If you look at all the kind of the moral intuitions and the moral values that community exists under.
More along the lines than not, Mormonism has a lot of correlations with Islam than it does with Christianity to some degrees. And the reason why, if I'm remembering that, I think I did watch this documentary you're mentioning. They were under the belief that God owns everything, which
Right.
is true to some degree. But if we're gonna fall under the principle of free will, you can choose what to do. You have free will to do with what you want to with your private property, and that's kind of falling under the Nazism definition for Christianity. And Hitler claiming to be Christian was that he said everything belongs to the states, like not necessarily your private possessions, because you still have your personal property, which was defined as things like toothbrushes and stuff like that. But in terms of privatization, what the socialists claim now is, the social means of the means of production, which Hitler basically did when he nationalized the, I guess, labor's force.
Yeah, but no, but what I'm saying is, I think what this is going to boil down to, and it feels like this what it boils down to whenever these kind of conversations about like were the Nazis left or right, it's just this, such as law, we kind of argue about what the left and right means, and there's just a different definition that we're focusing on for what the left and right means. And I'm saying that I don't think private property ownership is definitionally a right wing concept or idea at all. And you could definitely have, like, if you have a community that's all incredibly socially conservative and all their moral intuitions line up on a Heidian scale as like a, right wing moral intuitions, just because they don't have private property rights, that wouldn't say that they suddenly become like a left wing society.
So do you believe to some degree that the right wing now is more associated with private property, or was that a thing that
It
is
is in
true?
America. Yeah.
Okay, so how do I phrase this? By American terminology, do you believe that the private property, I guess you could say the privatized property that existed under Germany, was left wing?
That aspect of the policy, you could say, would definitely be on the current scale, would seem to be more left wing, I guess.
Because the
Is
distinction,
neoliberalism left wing or right wing?
a liberalism,
Neoliberalism.
uh, I would say slightly to the right. In
So
in
it's
terms in
close.
terms of definitions now, it would definitely be slightly to the right of center.
Okay, so it's centrist.
Yes.
Well, but this is kind of why it's weird because, obviously the far right people, the distant right people, they all despise neoliberalism. They all view neoliberalism and libertarian ideas as kind of the thing that allows the degeneration of society, right? And we've heard them kind of go on and on and on about this. And so that's why, like, it's hard for me to just say, like, well, if the Nazis were anti-private property, like, that's a left-wing thing. Because actually, because I don't think, like, just the concept of wanting to protect property rights or not, I don't even think that's necessarily a left right wing value. I think it's kind of a coincidence that lines up in America on the right, because I think that's, we've talked about this. We think that there's kind of like a left wing moral foundation, a right wing moral foundation, and then there's like a libertarian moral foundation, which is highly concerned with property rights, which is kind of separate from its own thing. But I think the only reason in America the right lines up with these, caring about property rights and property values and things of that nature is because the perception is, and the perception has been for a while, that the government, especially the federal government, is a left-wing organization that wants to come in and sort of, push left-wing values. I'm not sure if we lived in a country where the idea was that the federal government was a right-wing organization pushing right-wing conservative values. I'm not sure you would see libertarians, lining up on the right. I think you would see kind of a reverse of the situation.
Are you saying there will be a reverse of the situation now or then? Like,
Now,
let's say, okay.
I'm saying if the perception was like if we lived in some alternate universe where the federal government was perceived as being a conservative force that moves the country in a more right-wing direction, I think libertarians would be lined up on the left side of the political aisle instead of the right-wing side of the political aisle they are right now.
Is that because right now we're seeing the inverse of what you're describing?
Yes.
We're watching a bunch of left-wing policies basically becoming mainstream, and the libertarians going, okay, maybe we should vote for Trump.
No, I'm saying that. Okay, let me try to simplify what I'm saying. I'm saying that I don't think that people who are not libertarian in America, who are just like conservative, I think that the big reason that they care about like private property and property rights isn't because they have an innate moral intuition towards caring about private property or property rights. I think it's only because they perceive of the federal government as a left-wing organization pushing left-wing values, and so they need to have private property rights to sort of protect themselves and buffer themselves from like the evil left-wing ideology. If they viewed the government as having right-wing ideas, then I don't think they would have this. I don't think they'd care about private property rights the way they do right now.
Is that kind of why I don't want to say misinformed, but I'm misremembering your definition for fascism because you think that the right wing in America would more along the lines fall under fascism if it were a right-leaning government pushing for it?
I wouldn't say that. I'd say I don't know what you mean by that. I don't think conservatives in America are necessarily want to become fascistic whatsoever, but I still put fascism as a extreme version of a political ideology that exists on the right side of the spectrum, the way that socialism is the extreme version that exists on the left side of the spectrum.
Here we go with the Destiny fans again.
What?
I was laughing because it reminded me of you guys reviewing Destiny a couple months ago, and all the Destiny fans were saying, "Oh, well, you guys are saying conservatives aren't fascists," and it reminded me of Adam's Twitter posting like a couple hours ago of Destiny's subreddit clipping what you said out of context.
Right, of course, but no, but okay, like,
well, hold on a second. Just there are multiple spectrums in play here, right? Do you accept that like there are? It's not just property rights versus collective ownership of property. That's like not the only spectrum that makes up left and right.
Correct.
Okay. So why is that spectrum like the decisive spectrum in your estimation?
Because it was the defining movement of the beginning of the Third Reich. The first thing that they did in 1933 was eliminate private property.
Yeah. To what aim, though?
To what aim was to take everything away from the Jews and take away everything. And so
building like a strong German state wasn't the central animating philosophy. I mean, it's hard for me to say that they gained power just to eliminate private property. Like they were a bunch of, I mean, I was under the impression that they brought in the socialists just to form a coalition big enough to take power. Not that that was like the central animating force of Nazis.
Okay, so let me see if I can understand what you said correctly. You're saying that they brought in the socialists to basically strengthen the German state, not necessarily bring about
They brought them in as a coalition, as a democratic coalition, so that they could gain power. The Nazis gained power through elections.
Yes.
They were looking to expand their voter coalition,
Which ended up having them subsidize the poor, the farmers, privatizing the unions, and then eventually becoming so poor that they said, okay, we're going to have to start invading other countries. And we will export our debt.
I mean, that's kind of immaterial. What do you think the central animating force of Nazism is? You think it is socialism?
Correct.
Okay.
I think okay, if I were to be as charitable as possible, it would be the jingoistic version of socialism. You guys, we all talk about race Marxism for
CRT.
wow. Yeah, thank you. CRT. It's basically that, but you're just switching race and Marxism for socialism to
Yeah,
some
but
degree.
like, so socialism, to me, the central animating idea is that the world is not equal, and your society, your government, your country is not equal, and people are being taken advantage of because there's like a class of rich elites who are essentially stealing from you and stealing, your just labor from you. And so we need to abolish this elite class ownership and give workers and the people and the masses like their fair share of, the resources, and have like one class of people essentially, right? That's kind of like the animating force of socialism. And the animating force for Nazi Germany was very different. It was that there is a specific group of people, a class of people that are superior to all other people, and this is the white German Aryan people, and they are superior, and they are being subverted and degenerated down by all these lesser forces, non-white people, Jews, cripples, gays, blah 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 blah, and we need to purge all these sort of degenerate forces away from us so that we can reach our true, zenith of superhuman ubermensch level, reality, right? And so
But my
one of these,
argument is it didn't start that way. It didn't start out because of the
Mhm.
Jews and the cripples and
Well, it
black
did for
people and
Hitler. I mean,
gypsies and
even,
stuff like
when
that.
he was in prison, he was very anti-Jew. He was very anti-communist from the beginning.
Yes, but what I'm saying is the policies were not applied first
Hmm.
in the way that you're describing. They were applied to the top 1%. They were applied to farmers. They were applied to business owners. They weren't applied just to Jewish business owners later, or what they referred to as Jewish firms, where even if you had one Jewish laborer in your company, you could not have those subsidies from the German government saying that I am a Jewish free firm. So it like my whole argument was that it didn't start out targeting the Jews and all of the subsequent parties. It started out targeting that 1%.
So, yeah, but okay. Excuse me. So is the argument that, and by the way, I don't know enough about any of the history to know how this all played out, but I could conceive of it being possible that the Nazi party sort of implemented or even ran on ideas that were more socialisty, and then over time, Hitler pulls off the mask and is like, surprise, we're, more fascist than socialist, right? And then it becomes this other thing. And at that point, when it becomes the other thing, I mean, I would say, regardless of how it started, it's definitely not left wing. It's definitely right wing fascism at that point.
So your argument is that it evolved into being right-wing fascism based off of
Well,
what
if
I've...
what you're saying is true about like the way that you're talking about how this started, Hitler from the beginning, regardless of whatever policies they implemented, Hitler from the beginning, I mean, you agree he hated communists, right? Like that's like
Yeah,
he was,
of course.
and 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 I mean, I guess that's another question too. Is like he was very open with his hatred towards communism. The Nazi Party was very open with their hatred towards communism from the beginning, and it wasn't just from a globalist perspective, right? It was this whole they had this whole theory of race degeneration was baked into it from the beginning, and this degeneration of the German people was kind of baked into it from the beginning. And this seems to be completely contradictory to the idea of communism in the far left, which is all about like we need to, everyone is equal. There's no natural hierarchies. We need to dissolve all the hierarchies, blah, 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 blah. Right. So that's why it seems weird to me that the Nazis who want to super cement natural hierarchies would be considered far left when we consider the far left as the person believing that there is no hierarchies and we need to dissolve all the hierarchies.
Yeah, they're placing the German race at the top of the hierarchy.
You don't think those all fall under the broad category of leftism, though? Just for this, so I'll argue it from this perspective. Do you think that communism, socialism, and Marxism are basically horseshoe theory? Like on one side of the horseshoe, you have socialism. On one side of the horseshoe, you have communism. In the middle, you have Marxism.
I don't know the exact technical differences between like Marxism, socialism, and communism enough to say that. I would put them all on the far left. I would not put them on a horseshoe.
Okay, because from my understanding is that we'll go back to the private property again. Is every single one of the policies, well, not necessarily policies, every single one of the foundations that I've described, which are talked about, which is fascism, communism, or sorry, Marxism, communism, and socialism, all fall under the pretext of eliminating private property. It falls under the definitions of personal and public property, which personal property being things that you use on a daily basis, and public property, things that the state can use, or things that you can use under the state to make money or to make quote unquote capital, which they didn't like to use.
But do you think that you could, are you kind of defining this that like any kind of government or philosophy that abolishes or eliminates private property is automatically left wing? Is that how you're kind of viewing this?
Yes.
Okay. So, but so if you have someone like, Nick Fuentes gets his way and he, doesn't give a shit about private property rights and he abolishes private property rights, I mean, he doesn't consider himself left wing at all. No one in his movement, because they all consider themselves far right. Like, how does that work exactly?
This is exactly why I asked in the very beginning of, do you think socialists have a monopoly on what socialism is? I don't think some moron like Nick Fuentes, who bastardizes jingo, like neutered jingoism, to say that he's a conservative. If he's going to go along the lines and say that I'm going to follow the laws of this prescription for conservatism and abolish private property, no, he's doing exactly what Hitler did. Hitler said, I can do all these things in the name of the state, and we can make a better Germany.
So why do you think that private property rights is or should be like the definitive thing that describes the left and the right?
Mostly because it falls under the pretext of what Adam described yesterday, which was free will. Do you have free will, or does the state have free will to decide what you do with your property? So if the state has, if the state can decide what is public and privatized property, or sorry, personal and privatized property, then that falls under the left. If you can determine what to do with your property, and that falls under the right.
So are you kind of conceptualizing that on the spectrum, the left or the right is like more free will and the left is less free will in terms of how people engage in social contracts? Is that kind of how you're viewing this?
Yes.
Okay, so but why is that your definition for the left and the right?
Why is that my definition for the left and the right? Mostly because if we want to use the libertarian argument now, that they've always had, to basically, why do we have taxes? It kind of falls under what was the first president in the 1890s that tried to bring about an income tax, a 1% income tax?
I couldn't tell you.
I'm horrible with names, so I'm blanking on American history. Um, he was one of the first Democrat politicians, and if we want to, make this straw man argument about taxes being left wing under the libertarian argument, and libertarians now falling under the more center right side of the spectrum, that's kind of where I would make my defining like line in the sand.
No, but like,
You should
so
talk about specific like behaviors or intuitions as left and right, not groups of people. Like the libertarians are obviously contested. We've contested them many times on
So
the
you're
show.
saying what
Yeah, like
policy I would strike?
multiculturalism versus ethno-nationalism. Like where are those two? They're opposites, right?
I would say ethno-nationalism, it will go back to the horseshoe theory again. Ethno-nationalism can be extreme right and extreme left. I mean, if we look at, I'm
So,
going to,
so then multiculturalism is extreme right and extreme left, because when you flip them, multiculturalism goes to the other end of the spectrum. So multiculturalism is right wing. When ethno nationalism is left wing, then multiculturalism is right wing.
that's an interesting way. I didn't think about that.
Well,
What would
look,
that?
it's this is why I'm always drawing out the spectrums. This is why we
Mhm.
talk about the spectrums. You've got individualism on one end and collectivism on the other. So which one goes on the right? Which one goes on the left? You've got security on one end and you've got freedom on the other end. Which one goes on the left? Which one goes on the right?
I wouldn't personally define it as freedom versus order. I would more along the lines of define it as freedom versus I'm blanking on my terms here.
Well, just I mean, you can give us whichever ones you want. Like I there's one of the spectrums that I look at is like personal freedom versus social cohesion. Like as personal freedom increases, social cohesion decreases. But you at on that spectrum, which side goes on the right, which side goes on the left? There's like state power versus corporate power. Which of those which one goes on the right and which one goes on the left?
If I were to define it in my terms, it would be freedom versus justice. To what degree of injustice do we allow people to express their freedoms?
Let's stick with the multiculturalism versus ethnocentrism.
Okay.
Which one goes on the left and which one goes on the right? You're saying multiculturalism can go on the right at sometimes? When?
Okay, I think I misunderstood. I misunderstood the argument then. No, that cannot be the case.
Okay, so ethnocentrism goes on the right when multiculturalism is on the left. And you're saying that's multiculturalism generally people think of as on the left.
Yes.
Ethnocentrism people generally think of as on the right.
Okay.
The biggest component of Nazism is ethnocentrism. That's why people don't like this argument that the Nazis were left wing, because they're like, well, then you have to ignore all of the ethnocentrism, right? All of the ethno-nationalism. Like what nationalism versus internationalism? Which one goes on the left and which one on the right?
Oh, these are new terms.
Well, globalism or nationalism? Which
Globalism
one?
is definitely left. Nationalism is definitely right.
Okay. The Nazis were what? Nationalists.
I would slightly disagree. I would say that due to the fact that Hitler wanted his policies outside of Germany, that would turn it into globalism.
He wanted to take over other nations and turn them into Germany. That's what he wanted to do. Look, if we have three spectrums,
but he did it
here,
for the reason that the country was going into debt.
Let me just say, we have three spectrums here, right? We've got multiculturalism versus ethnocentrism. We've got globalism versus nationalism, and we've got socialism versus private property. On two of those spectrums, the Nazis are on the right. On one of those spectrums, are on the left. Why don't we just go by the numbers?
Because the defining policy was socialism.
I would say the defining policy was ethno-nationalism.
Well, it was ethno-nationalism later. They started the first domino to fall was private property.
Right,
You can't nationalize, you can't create an ethno state without creating the foundation for it. And that
I would
foundation
argue
underneath Nazism was socialism.
I would argue that the only reason they brought in the socialists was so that they could get enough votes to gain power. That it was just a subterfuge. That it
I mean, I'm
wasn't.
not going to disagree with that. Hitler literally killed one of his top socialist policy proponents
So then he
in
was
1938.
So he was pretending to be a socialist to bring in some of the left wingers so he could get in power, but he was really right wing.
I wouldn't say he would pretending.
Okay. Why?
Because I mean, because he jailed and he murdered socialists, communists, and capitalists. He hated everybody who wasn't for the
Who
German
wasn't
state.
an ethno-nationalist? Yeah, exactly.
Well, he would get rid of anyone that stood in his way.
Yeah,
for whatever
exactly.
he wanted. Yeah, he wasn't thinking like, oh, well, I disagree with this guy, but he, functions within my ideological parameters, so he's okay. Like that wasn't the issue. But I guess because the way that I think me and Adam are looking at this is we're looking at like what is the primary animating
Yeah,
energy
exactly.
behind Nazism, and it was ethno-nationalism. Even if that might have been, I don't know enough about the history, but even if that was like disguised in the beginning, that's definitely what it became. That's definitely what it was. That was the central animating force. I mean, they weren't, the amount of energy and time they spent rounding up Jews and other people to kill, like they weren't doing that with, we got to round up and kill all the capitalists, right? Like,
I mean, that's essentially what they did if you disagreed with them for Jewish firms.
yeah, they were rounding up anyone who disagreed with them too. But the people disagreeing, they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't be ethno-nationalists. They're like, oh, round them up.
Well, hold on real quick, Adam. In order to expound on what Sis just said, they did do that if you didn't follow the Jewish firm policies.
Right. So if you didn't follow their ethno-nationalist policies, then they would kill you.
But you could still say that you didn't support it and still get rid of the Jews. Is what I'm saying. You could still say, I don't agree with this openly, and you could still do business.
Okay.
But your business would still be privatized under the German state. It didn't matter what you said. If Germany decided that your business was profitable and they could use it for the state benefit, they took it.
Okay. So
that policy would fall under leftism.
No. Because again, what we're saying is that the central animating force, the thing that everything is in service to in the Nazi ideology, is this ethno-nationalist idea. Everything else is in service to that idea.
No, it was to the German state.
Right, but that was part of it. Any policies about taking people's property was all in service to the idea of creating this mythical, ethno-nationalist, magical German Übermensch society. Everything was in service to that.
And so, my argument is that brought about the policies that we see today with the leftists, is they say no more private property.
No, but what we're saying is, okay, so how like when we're talking about, this comes up a lot with the Israel conversation, like is Israel doing a genocide, right? And then the response to that is, well, genocide requires a specific intention, right? I'm sure you've heard this being discussed, right? And it's kind of the same thing whenever we're just like talking about like murder, the degrees of murder, was it premeditated, was it intentional, was it an accident, right? The intention of the action is something that we have to weigh heavily when kind of like conceptualizing and categorizing behavior. And so what me and Adam are saying is that you have to look at the intention. What is the intention of a government when it does an action? And so if you have a government that its intention is something that we would consider far right, which is to establish an ethno-nationalist nation, if that's its intention, if that's its goal, even if it does an action that you might consider left wing, like say take away people's private property, it's still within service of a right wing, far right wing intention. The same token would be if you had some kind of socialist government, which has the intention of, flattening all hierarchies to create, their magical, money-free utopia or whatever, nonsense they want to do. if they implemented, I don't know, some kind of something that we would consider like a right wing um, idea, then it would still be in service of a left wing goal, still be in service of a left wing attention, and we'd still say broadly it's a socialist left wing government.
Is mm, is this going to fall under the same policy of a mixed economy where you have different socialized aspects and different nationalized aspects, or is this along the lines of saying no, one policy defines the other? Because that's how I'm determining this. Ethno-nationalism for me is a more, this is gonna sound kind of butchered because I'm still working through this as I'm saying it. Ethno-nationalism falls under more of a socialized policy, whereas socialism falls under more an economic policy.
No,
Would you agree or disagree?
ethno nationalism. Yeah, ethno nationalism is not an economic policy at all.
And
Yeah,
that's why I'm saying that economic policy is what defined Nazism.
but that's not true. Didn't.
And okay, hold on, wait, I phrased that incorrectly. That policy defined socialism
Right, right.
under the Nazi Germany.
Well,
And
so I would say socialism is a political philosophy that, at least from its origin point, obviously things are a little bit more different now, but was primarily categorized by its economic policies, while Nazism is something that it was primarily categorized by its social policies.
so would you agree that Nazi Germany was socialist, but Nazism was more nationalist?
Can you wait? Say that again.
So socialist Germany,
Hmm.
sorry, let me Nazi Germany, the state, was more socialist, but Nazism is more ethno-nationalist.
As I
We
said,
can agree
I
there.
don't. I'm not informed enough to know about the specific economic policies of Nazi Germany to agree or disagree with how socialistic the economic policies of Nazi Germany were. Okay, my understanding was, and I thought Dev said this when we talked to him, my understanding was that Nazi Germany had fascistic economic policies, which are not free market policies, but they're fascistic economic policies that I would not consider necessarily left wing. It sounds like, well, okay, well, I think we have two major differences here. The first difference is that you're defining left and right as free will versus less versus uh, not free will, which we don't, neither me nor Adam uses that way
Yeah.
of defining left and right. And then the second thing is that it sounds like we're saying, well, we believe the intention of the goal or the intention of the government or the ideology is how you should define it. And you're saying it's not necessarily whatever the intention is, it's like how, like the majority of policies that make up the government or philosophy that gets it a left or right, categorization. Is that, like, you think that's correct in how I'm stating your position?
That's relatively fair. If I were to expound on that a little bit, the reason why I wanted to have this discussion for private property was to say that the socialist policy is, in my understanding, what defines private property, the differences in now for private property. So you have the left right now with what you were saying with Israel coming in and saying that, the right to return, these people do not have, these Palestinians who had their property taken from them are the ones that overall get to have these private property rights, not the ones who took the property. And my line in the sand is that's what's defining left and right now. Okay, so is your argument that that's not what defined left and right then, or am I misunderstanding you?
Well, so I mean, my definition of what defines left and right is sort of looking at I mean, I said it like a million times.
I'm just
It's just
I'm just doing
right.
for property.
Well, I don't think that I don't think property rights and valuing property rights is an inherent left or right wing position at all. And that's why I said earlier, I think the reason the right now in America tends to come down the side of private property rights is only because they view the infringing force of the government as being on the left side of things. But if they viewed that the infringing force of the government was on the right side of things, they wouldn't care about private property rights because they'd say, well, like if we were living in a society where the government was seen as like very, very conservative, and the government was very, say like hypothetically was like, oh, you can't open up a gay bar, right? No gay bar should be allowed anywhere. And then so you see the left to be over here saying like, well, what about my property rights? What about my freedom to have my property and businesses be established whatsoever? And then you'd have conservatives say, well, no, because your business is, degenerating society and, turning people gay and blah, 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 right?
So even if the left has always seen private property as a way to differentiate I guess you could say the haves and the have-nots, that wouldn't define the left under socialism?
I don't think the left hasn't always seen it that way. That's how communists see it. But communism isn't again, the left-right dichotomy started from moving from monarchy to liberalism. So I don't think it's fair to say the left has always viewed private property through that lens. I mean, obviously socialists have, but that's a different story.
Sorry, I meant to say left. I confuse leftists with socialists all the time.
Well, leftists are socialists generally, but
yeah,
I guess when you say left versus leftist, it's I guess it's a little different, but
too many terms.
Sure. Well, like, I mean, I guess just going back because this is why we have a different definition of left and right. Like, under the way that you're kind of framing it, if the right was categorized as like the side that's just more free will, I mean, why is the right in America not in favor of, everyone should be able to transition if they want to?
Ooh, that's a good question.
That is a very good question.
Or why is the right not in favor of abortion?
Mainly because it falls under the definition of truth.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
If I were to say that the defining factor of a human is what defines our DNA, that's a truth. Our human DNA is different from a banana, it's different from an apple, it's different from a tree. Mm-hmm. So I can look at something that's a 1 second fertilized egg. I can look at a clump of cells that's 2 weeks old or 6 weeks old before it has a heartbeat or brain activity and say, this is a human. That's truth, because if allowed to mature in 9 months, it would pop out a human. It wouldn't pop out a dog. So under the policy of why don't we just let everybody transition, because that's not the truth of the situation. The fact that the truth is that you are male or you are female.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with you, but that's a right-left hang-up, is that the right is more inclined to say there's some kind of natural order to something, right? So the natural order says that you are male because of your DNA, which, if you think about it, if the left says, well, no, you have the freedom to switch to whatever you want, then in that situation, the left is taking the, quote, more freedom side, and the right is taking the more oppressive side.
Inversely, the left is taking the more oppressive side by saying that you have to say that they're male or female when they're not.
Right, that's true too. In terms of like how they say other people have to react to them. Yeah.
So if we were to make the argument underneath that policy, do you think someone making the policy that they can determine what you do with your property is left wing or right wing? For instance, if I were to say that if okay, Sitch, you buy a car, and I, as the state, say, okay, you can only drive your car, even though that's your private property, you can only drive your car because it ends in a specific date. Or ends in a specific letter or number. This is what they're doing in California, by the way. you can only drive on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Do you
So
think that, do you
is
think
it
the
what
state determining what you do with your private property falls under left wing?
it would depend what their rationale for why the policy exists. Like, let me give you an example. So if like California says, hey, you can't buy that Honda because that Honda has like, bad gas mileage and it's causing more pollution, right? So you're not allowed to buy that car, right? Or you're not allowed to drive that car if you have it. I'd say, okay, that definitely seems to be a left-wing policy. But if you're in, Texas and they say, hey, you can't drive that Honda because, it has a big pride flag on it and it says, accept all trans kids or something, that's a right-wing policy.
Well, I'm gonna you just unironically admitted that free speech is a right wing policy by comparing emissions to free speech bumper stickers. Uh,
No, I said the
I know,
opposite.
I know. Well, okay,
Because in my example, the right was anti-free speech.
but what I'm saying is you're comparing the fuel emissions to. Okay, hold on a second.
I'm saying that both you could have a policy that is anti you driving a car that both the left and the right could put forward, but they're just doing it for different reasons. The left right now cares about the environment and emissions, and they could say, well, we're going to restrict your property rights for the environment. And the right is going to say, well, we're going to restrict your property rights because we don't want, you trains in the kids, or we're afraid, we don't want like gay shit, on your car. That was the point of the example.
I think the reason why I'm not understanding that to some degree is that I don't conceptualize the left wing right now being pro free speech.
They're
So
pro free
that's
speech
kind of
if the free speech aligns with their values, as all sides are,
Everyone
right?
is,
Yeah,
of
everyone is,
course.
sure.
I mean, I'd personally, I would disagree on that, but that's one of those things where it's like I'm going to
Well,
get into anecdotal evidence and stuff
yeah,
like
but you
that.
would agree that, like, okay, so I mean, there have been laws passed in Florida and some other red states where they're like, oh, you can't have drag shows, in certain buildings, right? If certain age groups are available to go inside, or just in general, right? That's a free speech issue, is it not? Shouldn't a
That
parent be
was,
allowed to take their child to a drag show if it's,
yeah, that was
you
struck
know,
down because of that reason,
right? But
and I
why? But
disagreed with that
why?
policy.
Right? But why is it the right that's pushing that policy in the first place?
Why is the right pushing anti drag show policies?
Yeah, something that would be an anti-free speech policy.
I think the defining factor there would be around children. And that's why there are some states where those laws have successfully passed and some states where those laws have failed, is because it didn't correctly define the difference between drag show and sexualized performances.
Right? But do you think the state should have more authority over a parent in terms of how to raise their child? Isn't that an anti-freedom position?
The fact that uh the fact that that's happening on both sides is what's confusing me, is because there was recently a girl that was removed from her father's care
Mhm.
and trans due to the mother's wishes.
Right.
So I think that's kind of where I'm getting that hiccup, is that I know that drag shows, even though I necessarily disagree with them, is a free speech policy and should be allowed. Um, it's just that, okay, well, in order to try to bring it back to the private property, do you
Well,
think?
but before you do it for a second, I agree with what you're saying, and what you're
Okay,
saying is correct. Is
yeah,
that there are examples on both the left and the right that we can point to and say, look, here's an example of the left's, restricting free speech or restricting parental control, and then here's an example of the right restricting free speech or restricting parental control. That's definitely going on. And so my point is, the fact that those examples exist and clearly exist shows that those philosophies about free speech or parental control aren't necessarily a left or right wing value. It's what they're in service to that's the left or right wing value. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I would say the same thing applies to property rights.
Freedom versus order. That's what Adam said before, right? Is that
well?
Freedom versus security is usually what people.
Security,
yeah,
sorry.
that's usually the philosophical debate. Yeah.
Okay. And I think the reason why I got confused with freedom versus order is because of my definition of freedom versus justice. I think that's where I'm getting my hiccup on your definition, because I'm kind of injecting my own sense of justice in order.
The whole idea behind the spectrum is the closer you get to one end, the further you get away from the other end. So that's why, look, multiculturalism and ethnonationalism is a good one. Like, the more multicultural society it is, the less ethno-national it is, and vice versa.
And I guess that's kind of where I kind of struggle with at the moment with your definition, is because I don't see a lot of these things as a left-right spectrum. I see a lot of it as horseshoe. One of the policies that I do see as left and right is private property, because we have more people now saying that there's a difference between public and personal property. There is no private. They're completely redefining what makes private property recognizable to some degree, because they're saying, okay, well, yeah, this is your toothbrush. I know this is your private property, but you don't make money off of your toothbrush. But then they'll turn around and say, the instant you say you can make money off of your toothbrush, it still makes it so that way it can't be rented, which is another stupid term that they keep throwing out.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that is driven by like the oppressor oppressed lens, and they view people who have a lot of property or own businesses as oppressors. Obviously, they're oppressing the people who need the products and services, and they're rich, so they're higher status, higher in the hierarchy. So, but I don't. I mean, I haven't really thought much about a spectrum, like how you'd put a spectrum together for private property. So,
I mean, if I were to tickle your brain a little bit, I think the way you could conceptualize that for freedom versus security is, who has the freedom to use your private property in order for you to secure your freedom. If I were to make some kind of, like, philosophical bullshit phrasing here.
I don't disagree. It sounds like philosophical nonsense, but I don't.
Welcome back.
We didn't even miss you.
Thank you.
Dev is winning in the poll.
Are we gonna have Dev come on? Because he said that this is a dumb conversation, so we need to have Dev correct us and explain to us why it's dumb.
Dev, join.
Yes, tell us, Dev. Save us, Dev.
I'll send Dev the link.
Since you're so smart,
I don't think I've actually been on Discord for like 2 months.
Dev's on Twitter, isn't he?
Oh yeah, I can send him a link on Twitter.
Yeah.
You can send him a link on Twitter. Sucks.
Is he on Twitter?
You could, yeah.
DM me, Dev. I'll send you a link.
Dev, what is your Twitter name? It's sleepy _Dev. Here, I'll send it.
Okay, you send it.
Okay.
I'm curious to know why he thinks the conversation is dumb. Unless, I think if I'm remembering his conversation with you guys, is he was defining the policies as socialism versus fascism.
Well, look, I think this conversation is because right wingers don't want to be associated with the Nazis, which I think is actually a good thing. I think it's good.
I don't want to be as a right winger. I don't want to be associated with Nazis.
Yes, yeah.
Of course.
So
And the
that's
thing,
a
see,
good thing.
here's the
That means
thing.
right wingers are not as racist as the left wants to make them out to be, right?
And here's the thing with
Obviously.
that. I don't think the left wants to be associated with Nazis either. I'm associating the policy with socialism. I'm not associating it with Nazism. And I think that's kind of where
Well, this
I'm
whole
either A,
game,
not being able to articulate it well enough, or B, that I need to refresh my history, my knowledge on history.
this whole game is smearing the other side by associating with the Nazis. Like I really think that's all that's going on with this
The
whole
policy defining 1933.
Well, I mean, this is why I asked, like, who really cares? Like, if the Nazis were right wing or left wing? Like, okay, Stalin and the communists, everyone associates with left wing, right? And they murdered and killed a bunch of people too. So who cares? Why isn't there this overwhelming effort to smear the? Well, I bet there is people on the left that want to say Stalin was right wing.
So
I'm sure we could probably find 20
oh yeah,
videos
of
on
course.
that. Yeah.
So,
So
if I
look,
were to say that
everyone
I'm
wants
not
to say that
trying-
my side is completely innocent. You know, there's no bad things happening on my side. That's the origin of this whole conversation.
So if I were to say that I'm not trying to relate the Nazis with left wing, I'm trying to associate the Nazis with socialism, would that be a little more apropos?
Sure. Yeah, of course. I think that's easier to do. I mean why not go after ethno-nationalism? Why is ethno-nationalism on the right?
Probably because a lot of the people associated that with Nazis again, was what you were saying.
Well,
Which
there's
is
a
funny
lot.
because the Soviets did the same thing with Ukrainians during the whole Holodomor.
Right.
Right. Well, hello, Dev.
Dev.
Dev is here, but he's muted, so I don't know what's
Hello.
going on.
Good.
Hello.
Hello.
So why are you coming out as a monarchist on the stream? What's going on?
Okay, so first of all, arguing over whether or not something is left or right wing is just retarded on the face of it, automatically, always, because it doesn't actually say anything about any of the ideas. It's
That's
just
a cuck. That's a cuck answer. I'm sorry, Dev.
but it's the truth. It's the
It does,
truth. However,
everyone.
however,
Here's the
hold on,
problem.
However,
wait.
hold on, no,
These
let me
are
finish.
names and
Let
labels
me
that everyone
finish.
uses. You have to have the conversation. You can't just say,
So-
"Well, it's all stupid."
Yes. However, if you are gonna have the conversation, okay,
Uh-huh.
the low IQ take is saying that fascism, or sorry, Nazism is right wing. Okay.
Mhm.
The mid IQ take is saying that it's left wing. The high IQ take is saying that it's centrist, because it's obviously centrist.
It's a mixed
Mm.
economy. This is exactly what I said.
And why is it?
Why did we
centrist?
bring Dev
I'm
on
messing with
again?
you.
Why are you
So I
why are
can-
you besmirching the
can-
name of centrism with
So I can
Nazism?
wrecking
Dev?
ball the whole fucking thing. That's
Uh-huh.
why. Yes.
Why is it centrist?
No, it's
Oh my
obviously
God.
centrist, of course, because it has a
He's
whole
like-
bunch of
he's
right wing
like,
policies
all
and has a whole
these-
bunch of left wing policies.
What are the right wing policies that the Nazis have?
Oh, the ethno-nationalism, obviously.
Why is
The
ethno-nationalism a right wing
imperialism,
policy?
hold on, the imperialism.
Yeah, that's the question I want. Why is ethno-nationalism a right-wing policy?
So
Why is that not left-wing?
I'll
I mean, there are
agree with
plenty of
the-
black
okay, well,
nationalists
I'll
that are
agree
on the
with the
left.
imperialism. I will disagree with the ethno-nationalism part.
you think that ethno-nationalism is left wing?
I think ethno-nationalism can be centrist.
Sure, maybe. Well, here's the thing, right? When you talk about like black nationalists, Adam and Sitch, you guys think those guys are right wing or left wing?
I think and we've talked about this before. I think it's kind of
We have, yeah.
ironic. I think the black nationalists are actually right wing, even if they identify as socialists. I think they're actually right wing. It's just
Yes.
that
Okay,
how
socialism,
come?
because the way that I view these movements is what is it all in service to? What is the underlying goal? And if the goal is ethno-nationalism, even if you have some economic policy that's socialist, it's still a right wing. It's all
Okay.
the service of a right wing
Um,
philosophy.
What about nationalistic movements that spring up as a result of post-colonialism?
I can't even conceptualize what you're saying. So you have to give me some like
Okay,
a grounded
so-
example.
Okay,
or
okay,
something,
okay,
or
okay.
hypothetical or something.
Right, when you like you know about like the post-colonial isms, right? Like how
Yes, of
like what
course.
post-colonial where
Yeah.
we're at a point now where there's no longer actually direct empires. Instead, the European powers have pulled out of Africa and Asia and South America, and instead, what they do is those places have their own governments, but they're
Mhm.
still ultimately bought and paid for by the capitalists of Europe and North America. And so now you have this colonial system that is not actually an empire, but instead you have like foreign companies coming in and extracting resources and paying workers like all very low wages for the actual work that they're doing, right? So this is a post-colonial situation, right? So there's a whole bunch of movements across the world that leftists in the West tend to really support that are post-colonial, and they want to decolonize capitalism out of their nations. But they also, as a result of the fact that they're these third world countries, they also become nationalist. So are these left-wing or right-wing movements.
So basically what you're describing is what's happening in Rwanda, where the local government that is mostly Black Africans has voted out the white farming population, is what you're saying, right?
Possibly. I don't know about that specific situation.
So Rwanda basically passed a bunch of laws saying that if you have colonialist ties, basically white people, if you're a white farmer, the state, we're going to come back into privatization, the state can come in and take your property and give it to the people who it was rightfully owned by.
All right.
Is that kind of what you're describing?
Kind of.
They're
exactly.
quote unquote decolonizing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's kind of it. I'm talking more like you have banana republics where the government basically just kind of works on behalf of a Western corporation that has set up shop and is extracting value from the nation. And then you have these revolutionaries who are revolting against this, and they're anti-capitalist, but they're also very nationalist. So are these right-wingers or left-wingers?
So what is so is the policy of these, like this faction, is that what kind of system do they want to implement once they get rid of all these private companies?
I mean, they generally want to implement a socialist system. They almost never do, but they generally do want to.
Well, then I would say it'd be leftist then.
Sure, but they are nationalist though.
Okay.
They are ethno-nationalist, in fact.
Well, that'd be interesting. I'd have to know more about the specific thing to see how to categorize it.
I will bring up a couple of things for later on because I'm. It's really funny. I'm having this debate at work, so I'm on break.
That's pretty funny.
Oh, nice, dude. So, are you gonna get fired?
Nah, nobody cares. I'm sitting at my work computer right now. But it's one of, I will bring up a couple of things about the was it 2016 or 2017? I think this vote was in like the mid tens for usage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, are you taking off?
Well,
we don't want to get you in trouble.
Oh no, I'm fine.
But do super chat us on the company credit card though.
So look, okay. Boss man makes $1, I make a dime, and that's exactly why I poop on company time.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, you're a socialist. I got it. Yeah,
I got to address something. I want to address this super chat. Brian $20 says, ethno-nationalism can be right wing or left wing. What you're saying is to be racist is to be right wing, and I don't believe there's anything in the Republican conservative philosophy that leads to racism. That's not my position.
No,
my position is that. So if we're going to look at like, and I guess, I don't know, I feel like I said this a million times, but it always gets like lost. All right. So if you're ethno-nationalist and so you're saying that like my ethnicity is the superior ethnicity, I think that's a more inherent right-wing position on the right-wing side of the scale. If you're on the side of the scale where you say there is an ethnic component to like the society that is the majority oppressor population, and they're like causing all the problems and they're oppressing all the people, that's a left-wing position. And that's kind of what we're saying with wokeness, where they say, like white bad, right? So racism can be both a left or right-wing position. Racism isn't necessarily just a right-wing position.
So I agree with you, Sitch, but here's the thing. If you look at a lot of the anti-Semites from Nazi Germany, they had a left-wing form of racism because because some of them believed that the Aryan race was just a superior master race, but others said, hold on, the Jews are a foreign population in Germany causing all of the problems.
So if I were to expound on that, do you think the replacement? I'm gonna try to phrase this to not flag YouTube because I know it flags Discord all the time. Do you think this more not necessarily neutered, but this more mixed, like everyone will be brown in the United States in 50 years is ethno-nationalism to some degree?
Like there will be the idea that people want that to be like
no, I'm people. Yes, actually, do you think the policy that everyone in the United States will be like brown or black, that there will be no white or black in the United States?
I
Do
think
you
if
think that is
you
a form of ethno-nationalism?
right, if you are a brown person, if you're not white, and you're like, "Yay, I want the country to be more brown." Okay, I would say that's like an ethno-nationalist position, and it's more of like what I consider a, puts you more on the right-wing side of things. If you're a
Yeah, but
white
that's what the
person,
left wants.
right? I understand. I understand. Let me finish. If you're a
Okay.
white person and you're like, I want the country to be more brown because either I think that's going to help the Democrats win elections or because I think white people are bad, which is again, it's still a form of racism, then that makes you, I say it's a more left wing position. It's a leftist position.
I don't know about
Hmm.
that. I have to think about it. But here
Yeah,
though,
same.
let's
He
go back though,
stumped you
because
both. Look.
no, I just haven't thought
No.
about it before. It's new to me.
Well,
But here,
this is because let me just say again,
hold
because
on,
I
hold
guess
on.
let me
Okay,
just throw.
okay.
Okay, this is my thing, and I've said this again, but I
Yeah.
said it a million times, but I guess I say it again. Okay, my conception of left and right is that the right views that all of our answers for society come from tradition and established systems, and when we have a problem, we need to raise the borders and look inward because all of the problems that come are from outside of our system. Some external force comes into our system and degenerates it, and we need to expel it and look inward to find our answers. That's kind of like the right wing conception of reality. The left wing
Okay.
conception of reality is the opposite. It's saying all of our problems stem from existing systems, existing traditions, and come from within. And in order to find solutions, we need to go outside of them, go to outside of our borders, find new answers, and bring them into our society. And that's kind
So
of
so
how I
here
conceptualize the left versus right.
so here's the thing though, is that by that definition, there's a lot of leftism in Nazi Germany.
There might be. Sure.
Because I mean, first of all, the Nazis didn't raise the borders; they expanded them out, right? They didn't reestablish the
It
old.
They were
means a
raising
conquest.
Just
they
wait,
were
yet
they were raising
nonetheless,
categorical borders between like what defines, a German, what defines a white person.
they also didn't reestablish any of the old pre-Weimar social institutions. They didn't bring back the Kaiser. They didn't. They
They were
didn't.
looking
There was no
for
German
older as
conservatism.
but wait,
No,
wait,
no,
wait.
no, no. They
Weren't
made
weren't there
completely new institutions.
wait. I agree they were making new institutions, but wasn't the guiding philosophy of Nazism that we need to go back to this older way of thinking, this, kind of uh like this, that's kind of why they're anti-Christianity. They're like Christianity is like the slave religion that's kind of newer and it, gives credence to weakness. And we need to go back to like an older, more like European pre-Christian idea where strength is lionized. And this is why like a lot of the white
Um,
nationalists and Nazis are actually like kind of anti-Christian.
Well, then
this
why
is an
did they bring
idea.
in new
Hold on.
implementations of socialism?
Well, this is an idea that came in to the Nazi movement after 1945. This wasn't
Oh,
part of
okay.
them initially.
Well, I thought it was for
The
everyone
Nazis
though.
post 1945 absolutely think this way for sure, but
Mhm.
this wasn't really part of what they were doing. No, for
Well, I
them, a
mean,
lot of
Hitler.
it
Mhm.
was about remaking society in a revolutionary manner, the same way that the left wanted to do.
Right.
Just that their revolution was a different revolution, but it wasn't appealing to a past.
Well,
It wasn't what like reactionaries did.
why do you think that the post 1945 Nazi movement is situated in the way that I said?
Um,
Because it falls
the-
under the policies of fighting the communists in Soviet Union.
Well, no, in terms
Also
of
that's like
this.
10% of it. Yeah. I mean, how much retarded literature do you want to go through today, Sitch?
I mean,
Well,
we
no,
could
but
TLDR the
do
Berlin
you?
Wall.
I guess what the reason I'm asking that question is, do you do not like the conception of left and right that I'm laying out? I don't understand if you agree with it or disagree with it.
I kind of agree with it. I think there's
Okay.
more to it than that, but yeah, I kind
Well,
of
there's
agree with
always
it.
I'm trying to do it as broadly as possible. Obviously, there's always
Yeah,
going
I
to be
mean,
more
here,
to it.
if you want like the most broad definition of left and right that applies to pretty much every circumstance and
But
also
wait,
every
let me
time period.
before you give that, let me
Well,
just say why my
I've heard
definition of
yours.
right
I've heard
applies to the
yours though already.
Nazis.
I've already heard
Okay.
yours though. I've heard it
Okay,
many
give me
times.
yours. Okay, give me
Yeah,
yours.
yeah. Just hear mine out. Okay, so basically, the left is universalism. The right is particularism. The
Hmm.
left is social constructivist, and the right is nativist. That's basically it. And the Nazis had a whole bunch of points in all of those camps.
What is the particularist versus the universalist?
So the universalists tend to believe that there should be like one standard of of law, one standard of institution for all. This is like this is the liberal aspirational idea of everyone should be judged equally by the law. This is the socialist aspirational idea of there should be no classes, we're all equal. This is like universalism is like it's the flattening of power basically, and the standardization of how everyone is judged. The particularist idea is one where we understand that each community is different. It has like a different tone, a different culture, and they want to basically be self-governed. And you can see as you look at these two ideas, liberalism kind of straddles between them because liberals do like universal standards for all, but they also understand the idea of communities wanting to be self-governed and to be somewhat separate from other communities. So liberalism is that tricky centrist philosophy.
Sure.
However, the Nazis also agreed with both points in the end.
Right, but under
which is why they're centrists. The Nazis are like the evil inverse of the liberals.
Okay. Under your kind of definitions of particularism versus universalism, how wouldn't CRT and current socialist kiddies nowadays be right wing? Because they don't believe in universalism at all. They're anti-universalism.
What do you mean?
Their whole prescription when they look at Israel and they look at anything is there should not be a universal rule that applies to everyone. I have to instead operate according to P plus P equals R. If there's a power differential, if there's a class differential, different rules suddenly apply to the calculation.
Yeah, see, so the whole privilege plus power thing, that is their way of trying to get at what should eventually be a universalist principle. Also, and when we're talking about Israel, what you'll notice is they never, the very far left people, they never actually accept two-state solutions. They always say it has to be a one-state solution.
No.
Well,
that's not what I mean.
I know, but this will help explain it though, because if you talk to like a liberal or like most reasonable people, they say two-state solutions, right? Because it's going to be hard to work out, but two-state solution is probably the best. The far left people want a one-state solution because they say, well, everyone's the same, everyone's equal. There's no differences between all these individuals because we're all universalized. So why can't it just be one state? Now,
they make the argument that everybody is Palestinian.
They make the argument that everyone's the same, basically.
Well,
so that's kind of what they're getting at.
But no, because so the liberal position, the liberalism position is to say, okay, well, if you have free speech, this free speech applies to everyone equally, from a universal perspective, everyone has to follow the same rules, right? And then you have kind of like the woke socialist who says, oh, no, you're a white person and this is a black person. And because of the history of systemic racism and blah, 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 different rules suddenly apply to the calculation. And this black person gets, extra speech rights and you get less speech rights.
Couldn't that also be applied to what Saudi Arabia is doing to, is it Yemen? What's
hold on. Here's what I think you're getting at. Actually, wait, hold on. It just completely left my brain. What did you just say, Sitch?
I said, okay, we're talking about because you were saying universalism is left wing and particularism is right wing.
Yes.
And I'm saying that the woke socialists nowadays, they use particularism.
Right, no free speech. Right. So here's
no, it's no free speech for white people, right?
Yes,
but it's ultimate free speech for not white people.
Yeah. So I think the way that they're conceptualizing it is that this is basically bringing the equality back, because white people have had the free speech historically and black people haven't. So we have to basically give black people the free speech and not white people until such things as it's equalized, right? So this is them. They're still pursuing the universality.
Okay. So
I think what drives them. Yes.
Right. So you're saying that you can have a left-wing movement like the woke socialists nowadays that could be using tactics or behaviors that you might consider right-wing, but if it's still in service of a broader leftist goal, then it's still a left-wing movement, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's my exact point about the Nazis, is that their broader goal, the ethno-nationalist goal, was the primary goal is what we would both consider right-wing. So therefore, even if they implement left-wing policies to get there, it's still a right-wing movement.
Well, would it be though? Because we talked earlier about ethnonationalism. We said it had left-wing and right-wing components.
Because I guess the simple way to say it is that if you're ethno-nationalist in favor of your own ethnicity, I'd say that's right-wing. If you're ethno-nationalist against your ethnicity, that's the left-wing policy. So if you're racist towards your own in-group, that's right-wing. If you're racist against your in-group, that's left-wing.
So here's the thing. the issue with that, and this is why I said when I came in here, the Nazis were centrists in the end, is because there was a good chunk of both of those
That
in the
were
Nazi.
racist against their own in-group?
No. They were there was a chunk of them that believed that they were naturally superior and they deserved to rule the world.
Right.
And then there were a
Right.
chunk of them that believed that they were victims and they were a victimized, oppressed class that had to be liberated. Which is also a left-wing that is a left-wing component.
No, but that's a classic. There is a classic idea. So, you can even have like, we look at like the Nick Fuentes white nationalist movement, right? And obviously they're ethno-nationalists. They self-identify as being far right. I think most people would agree with that definition. And they're definitely saying like, oh, like white people on some intrinsic level, they believe is superior to non-white people. But at the same time, they do say, oh, well, white people are being victimized by Jews and non-whites via crime, via birth rates, via blah, 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 right? So those aren't contradictory ideas.
Sure. But here's the thing, though, is you could go talk to a black nationalist who would say the exact two things. Black people are superior and black people are victimized. We still call that a left-wing movement, though.
Yeah, but I think that's wrong.
Okay.
I think that's a right-wing movement. I think ethno-nationalism definitionally in favor of your own ethnicity is a right-wing movement.
So if that's the case, if that's the case, then we kind of get to the universalist particularist model, right? Where the particularist is right-wing, and he's the one who is specifically oriented towards a single community rather than a universal standard.
No, I might actually, I'd have to think about it, but I might agree with your universal versus particularism being a more left right wing thing. I might agree with that completely. But I'm just saying you get into this problem because there definitely are. Well, here's why this is a difficult and weird conversation. Okay. I believe you could have a white person advocate for policies, and because they're white, I would categorize it as them being a leftist, right? If they're a white person who's very racist against white people and advocating against white people from a racialist perspective, I'd say that person's probably a leftist. But if you're a black person and you're advocating for racism against white people and advocating for like black nationalism, I'd say that's a right-wing policy. So you could have two people advocating for the same policy, but one could be from a leftist perspective and one could be from a right-wing perspective.
Right. So at this point, since even though you can isolate out left-wing components of ethno-nationalism, it does seem to be the case that ethno-nationalism, because it's a particular movement rather than a universalist one, it is on the right ultimately.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so if you think that Nazi Germany was only ethno-nationalist and that was its main driving force, then you could say that it was a right-wing movement. But I'm not sure.
I wouldn't say only. I'd say
I
primarily. That
So
was
I'm
their
sure
primary goal. What was their primary goal, do you think?
I think a lot of it was what the left would call nowadays post-colonial.
That's exactly what I was
sense.
trying to get into. Like literally just now, you brought that back up. My understanding of this conversation so far is that if the left were to allow Palestinians to say, okay, everybody inside Palestine has to be Arab, that's the left supporting the underdog in the P plus R argument. But that would still fall under the definition of an ethno-state because everybody within Palestine is an Arab. There would be no Jews, there would be no Christians, there would be no white people, there would be no Chinese, etc. So under that framework, would the left be supporting a right-wing policy of ethno-nationalism?
Well, I don't know if the left would. It's hard for me to imagine the left would say everyone in Israel has to be Arab, right?
No, Palestine.
What do you mean? But they're not saying that they have to change their ethnicity. They're saying this kind of fantasy idea that it should just not be Israel. It should be Palestine. It should be a magical, multicultural one state, right?
Yeah, but they're saying right now Israel is an ethno-state when they're not.
Right.
There are Arabs living within Israel, but there are zero Jews living within Gaza.
Yes.
So is
100%.
the left unironically or unintentionally, or are they just too stupid to realize the fact that they're supporting Palestine or Gaza, which is an ethno-state? There's zero Jews
they're stupid
in Gaza right now.
They're stupid and racist. They're racist against white people. Yeah.
So they're just unironically supporting a right-wing policy is what you're claiming.
100%. Well, it depends. If they're white, yes. If they're not white, then maybe not. Because because what you're saying is true, and this is kind of the irony of the situation. Obviously, if we were to say what government, like if we were to take Hamas, okay, and then we were to take the Israeli government, say put these on a spectrum of left and right, obviously the everyone that's not retarded would say, okay, Hamas is obviously going to be much further right than the Israeli government. Correct? We'd all agree here with that.
To some degree, I would agree.
I mean, it's a religious theocratic organization. It's a theocracy, essentially.
I mean,
And Israel is not.
There are Muslims that can still practice in Israel, and there are
No,
Christians.
no, no,
that
no,
can
no.
still
I'm saying
practice.
Hamas is a theocracy.
Oh, Hamas.
And
Yes,
and
sorry.
Israel is a democracy that is that
Hamas is
has religious
absolutely
freedom,
a
right?
theocracy, correct?
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So Hamas, I think most would agree, Hamas is further right than the Israeli government. And yet, because of kind of a bunch of other political considerations, the leftists bend over backwards to defend the religious theocracy that is Hamas.
Well,
I
yeah,
would
because
have
they're
to come up
brown,
with,
obviously.
yeah. I would
Well,
have to
there you
come up
go.
with
And
a
that's where
better
the
argument
racism
that
comes in.
disagrees with that.
Right. So,
So okay, here's what I mean though, right? See, I found what I was looking for. I don't know if wait, is there a chat in Zoom? I can
there
drop
is.
this in? Where is it?
If you hit the more button, there
Okay,
should
I
be
see
something
it
that
now.
says
Thank
chat.
you. Yeah, I posted this because this was back during my Hitler reading arc.
Oh my God.
Yes, yes, Adam. I read all the nonsense.
How
But yeah,
many
so
copies of Mein Kampf do you own?
Yeah, exactly.
just the one. It's illegal to own any more than one. But yeah, so this is a guy on January 15th he's from a very far left group who's very pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. And he said, when we finally deal that final blow to destroy Israel, when the state of Israel is finally destroyed and erased from history, that will be the single most important blow we can give to destroying capitalism. This is a very far left guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is the same shit that the National Socialists said, ultimately. Now, it wasn't about Israel because Israel didn't really exist as a country, but they blamed a lot of the capitalist problems on Jews, and they talked a lot about the oppression of the Germans, which is why I replied with the logic here that international capitalism is a system of rich empires extracting wealth from poor vassals is the same logic that Hitler used regarding Germany's World War I reparation payments, or Mussolini used to describe the mutilated victory.
Yeah, but
And well, this is an important part of the conversation, though, right? Because it wasn't just the Aryan race is superior. That wasn't the only animating force. Another huge animating force, just on the ethno-nationalist part of the Nazi conversation, was the fact that they felt like they were being extracted from and taken advantage of by stronger nations, and that it was ultimately a form of racism against them that they had to revolt against. And
yeah,
this is
no.
why, by the way, the
Mhm.
Americans said at the end of World War II, okay, we're not going to make you pay back for all the damage you did. We're actually going to help you rebuild, because they understood that World War I is what caused World War II to happen.
Right. And yeah, definitely the German people, they definitely, they're coming out of World War One. The Weimar Republic is having all sorts of economic problems and is very not stable. And they feel like they're getting taken advantage of by the other countries. And they feel like they're being oppressed by the other countries. I agree with all that. But there's a difference, ideological difference, between saying we need to abolish capitalism because capitalism is an oppressive structure that the elites use to control us, and we instead need to have some kind of, universal flattened hierarchy, one class of people that, are all unified together. That's very different than saying, oh, we're being oppressed by these other nations, and capitalism is coming in and degenerating our Germanness, our German peopleness, and we need to fight off these oppressive shackles and once again regain ourselves, or once again go to the top of the hierarchy to reestablish our natural dominance as being the superior Aryan people. Like these are very different
Well,
ideologies that are reacting to
real
the
quick, Dev.
same
yeah, okay,
physical
go ahead. Go ahead.
economic limitations.
But I do have to run. I just got called into a meeting. One,
Don't get fired.
so one, good conversation. Two, Shu, congrats on the baby. Bye.
Thanks for
Later.
coming on to our sex. Okay.
Well, there he goes. So
Anyway,
the thing is, such like you had it up until the very end, right? Because for when we're talking about the post-colonial if we're going to use, it wasn't called post-colonial back then, but it shares a lot of similarities with today's post-colonial movements. Let's just call it that, right? The
Mhm.
post-colonial aspect of what motivated Nazi Germany, they didn't do it out of a sense of superiority. They did it out of a sense of liberation. This was a my people are being oppressed argument,
No,
not
but
we are the master
liberation,
race argument.
but you have to ask yourself what comes after quote liberation? What does the reconstruction post-liberation look like?
Well, you have to ask anybody who has an argument from liberation. Like
No,
what
but
comes after anyone's liberation, though?
I know, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think saying that we're just the left doesn't have a monopoly on the concept of being oppressed, which is kind of what it sounds like the argument that you're making.
Um, I think they might actually, thinking
Really?
about it.
Okay. So maybe
Yeah,
this is the ideological difference between us. Because like when I
maybe.
hear people that are like the very pro-Trump people saying that they're being oppressed, by the government or whatever, I don't think that's an inherent left-wing concept.
Well, I mean, that's why they're mega communists, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't make any sense. Right.
Well, this is what I mean, though, is that like the oppressor oppressed dynamic seems to be something that comes out of left-wing thought, not right-wing thought. If you actually look at like, true right-wing philosophers, they don't care about that stuff. They're all about like honor and heroism and duty.
Mm-hmm.
These sort of things. They don't care about oppression. They don't care about victimization. It's a different way of viewing morality.
No. I don't disagree with you, but I think when you have these, okay, so like political movements don't exist in an ideological vacuum of philosophers. They exist in a world where a politician or figure is trying to be persuasive to an audience. And so very often the language and concepts used have to be couched in whatever the popular language and concepts of the time are. Right. And so
Sure.
this is
Yeah.
why you can have, I'm sure you've seen, and we've seen a million of these articles that are, people on the left that say like, oh, the right wing white victimization movement. All the white people do is they cry victim, they cry victim, they cry victim, right? And they're trying
Mhm.
to kind of like flip the script on the right. But that just because there's a person who says, listen, I'm a white person and I think I'm being, the victim of racism against me, I don't think that magically means that all of a sudden they've like inhabited the left wing part of the spectrum just because they're saying that they're the victim of oppression or racism.
Remember, Sitch, everything after the Enlightenment is just left wing.
Well, okay, I know you don't believe that, right? I know you don't believe that. Okay, so we're not going into that territory, but
This is what I mean, though. This like because you could actually make the mold bug argument of everything after the Enlightenment is left wing, but it becomes a useless term. But you can at least think about the idea and have a framework, and then figure out what actually right wing is. Or you could use the inverse, right? Because how many communists have said that liberals are far right because they're not overthrowing capitalism, right? This is why I don't like the labels argument because it's just annoying.
no,
Because it's
right.
so. But like this is also why I default to um, universalism and particularism and social construction and naturalism. And it's also why I think that the Nazis are centrist in the end, because the Nazis had a lot of social constructivism in their philosophy, but also a lot of naturalism. And they had a lot of particularism. They also had some universalism too.
What was the social
So,
constructivist policies the Nazis had?
well, their over reliance on propaganda, the idea of the fascist new man, these sort of things, right? They could build a new society from the ground up that would be like it would be a modern invention, but it would be ultimately theirs.
Yeah, but wasn't it
The
supposed to
idea
reflect
is
a natural hierarchy?
not necessarily. I mean, it's strange, right? Because when you see if you were to get someone, okay, here's a great example. Here's a great example. Let's say that you got academic agent and
Mm-hmm.
J.F. Garapi into a room and had
Mm-hmm.
them debate. Despite them both being very far right people, how much do you think that they would actually agree?
I don't know. I don't know enough about their philosophy to comment on
well,
that.
well, academic agent, he's much more of like a not he's not religious, but he's like a spiritualist almost.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to do with race and spiritualism and some of the things that he talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Garapi though, he's a race scientist, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the left would call these two people Nazis, but they have very different ideas
Mm-hmm.
regarding what
Sure.
race is. And
Yeah.
so there's an aspect of Nazism that was very futuristic, very forward thinking, very scientific, but it was scientific in its racism, right? These are the guys who are like measuring people's heads and noses and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also had the spiritualistic aspect, and these are like the Nazi occultists. And these two groups didn't always get along, but they're still what we call Nazi.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm following. What is the point of? I mean, you could have a bunch of communists argue with each other about like what form of communism, and there's differences between all that too.
Sure,
Right?
sure, and they purge
But
themselves.
we still say they're on the
all
left.
times, yeah.
Right, and we still say they're on the far left, and we still say both JF and Academic Age are on the far right.
We do, but is that accurate though? I mean, like because here's the thing. Well, if we're going to take a different spectrum, and let's say the spectrum is for left wing is science and right wing is religion, JF would be far left.
This is how we know that Dev is a leftist. Okay, he's trying to make everything's a social construct argument right now. Okay, because that's what I mean. It's essentially what you're doing. Is you're saying like, well, these are just human-made categories and labels. So does it really matter, Sid?
I mean, kinda and kinda not. Like, yeah, I am taking the piss a little bit, right? But what I'm trying to get across to you is that left and right as labels are useless, and I fucking hate them. But if we must use them, I think universal in particular, and social construction and native, those are the ones, because they seem to broadly cover everything. Now, the hang up with that is that if you use those two spectrums, it does put the Nazis somewhere in the center, and people don't want to swallow that pill, but it is the truth. You must swallow the centrist pill. You must accept the Nazis as your brothers. This is how it is.
So
why do we invite Dev on again?
I know.
It's like
the mistake.
Wait,
yeah,
really? You guys don't
mistake.
like it? Are you being serious, Adam?
I am, yeah. I just look the whole point of doing this exercise is to smear people, right?
Oh well.
That's the whole point of having this debate, and you're coming in here kind of maybe oblivious to that. Maybe you don't even really understand the optics of this debate. Maybe you don't understand the motivations behind this debate.
Probably not, because I don't really care about optics at all.
Right? Yeah. He's got that.
Listen. I would not keep Mein Kampf on my bookshelf in photos if I cared about optics.
If you care about optics. Well, I think. Well, I want to be clear. My position on trying to like understand the left-right spectrum and where the Nazis are has not to smear anybody.
Yeah, look.
Because that's not my position.
Adam's the smear job guy.
No. I think that people who constantly say the Nazis are left, to me,
they're playing that game. We're not playing that game.
I think there's two things.
I'm not playing that game.
I think. Well, you're not saying they're on the left. You're saying they're centrist. But I think it's either A is again smear the left, or B, I think it comes out of a incorrect idea that is mostly an American idea, but not entirely. That to be on the right is to be libertarian. And I keep saying that idea is not true. Because if that's true, all the right-wing conservatives who are very religious, who would be very happy with religious law being instituted into government law, would no longer be right-wing. They'd all become left-wing. And I think that's the problem, is that libertarians don't exist comfortably on a left-right spectrum. I understand that and I agree with that, but they want to take it over and say, no, we're the real right wings. Everyone else who's not libertarian is a left winger. And that's not the way that these categories are used in America. And libertarians are a minority. I'm sorry, but they just have to accept that they're their own thing. They're their own separate category.
So I completely agree with everything that you've just said.
Right.
Yes. So hold on. I thought you guys were legitimately debating fascism. I didn't know this was like a crypto anti-libertarian talk. No.
It's not anti-libertarian. It's that Twitter Sucks came on and he, we didn't really know exactly what he wanted to talk about, but he was kind of saying that from the way that he conceptualizes it is that the left-right spectrum is the right is more pro free will and the left is less free will, which is
retarded.
Well, I don't agree with that spectrum either. Okay.
That's fucking retarded.
And so that was kind of what we were talking about. And I don't remember exactly how we got sidetracked into the Nazi part of the conversation, I guess, because it always kind of goes to that position. But I think I agree with that. Like, on one hand, the left-right spectrum an idea, it is a limiting idea. And maybe it would be actually, no, I disagree. It is limiting, but I think it is a useful conception. And it definitely latches onto something. It definitely fits onto something. There's definitely an intuition that I think can broadly be understood as like left and right. And then obviously it can break down into very specifics and they can argue with each other and be different. But I do think there is a broad binary that exists between human groups.
Yeah, sure, sure. And actually, I do agree with you there. But what you're saying is mapping onto something that I've been thinking about, right? So if you look at what we consider to be the various right-wing philosophies, well, what makes them right-wing, right? So, and now think about it in terms of universality and particularity, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
a monarchist, he's on the right, that he's a particularist. Why? Well, because you have basically,
How are you defining particulars?
well, the same as I defined it earlier.
Okay, I wasn't paying attention. I was putting once on everyone.
Okay, so a universalist idea is basically the idea
That's the
that
easy one. I get
yeah,
that
everything
one.
should be
Okay.
equal, everything should have like the same standard,
Right.
universal standard, global, blah blah blah. Okay, so the particularist idea is the idea that communities that have some sort of solidarity, they like to be somewhat self-governing. They like to have their own standards that aren't the same as other communities. They like to be kept apart, basically.
So different laws would apply to different people.
Well, let's say different communities.
So, okay, within one nation. So like you could have
It can be within one
aristocracy.
nation or within many nations, right? Because this is why I think the right wing says that the liberals ultimately want to make a global state, because universalism does lead to that eventually. Because we do live in a particularist world in a sense, because we have multiple countries with multiple standards of law. But there has, the Enlightenment project has been a very slow movement away from that towards something more universal. Which is why, by the way, most liberals in the United States, they prefer, like these various internationalist institutions and, global coalitions and all this sort of thing. It's all kind of a very vague, very broad push in that direction. And then
Okay.
you have particularists who are like, hold on, no, 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 no. I want my country to simply be my country, and I don't want to be under the sovereignty of another country. I want my standards to be mine, and your standards can be yours, and things can be a bit
So
different here. That's okay.
so right wingers are the moral relativists.
In some sense, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so wouldn't that have a problem? Like we could have a hypothetical situation where there's someone who we would consider to be very socially conservative, very pro-life, very anti-LGBT, very wants kind of like a more religious, theocratic way of living, but they live in a socialist country, in a very secular socialist country. And then they get invaded, that country gets invaded by like a right-wing theocracy. And so they're like cheering on the right-wing theocracy because they'd rather they take over that country and live under that form of rule.
I mean, yeah, I think that's why a lot of conservatives have gone like pro-Muslim in the past couple of years, despite hating them 10 years ago. It's the same
Right,
thing, yeah.
but that would kind of run afoul the particularism that you're talking about, because they'd say, well, I don't want my particular country's ideas to keep existing because they go against what I want.
Well, sure. I mean, it's because those people have already viewed their country as becoming fully corrupted by global homo. So,
Yeah, but see, that's kind of the problem is that it's like an
Very
unfalsifiable thing,
convenient.
because then it's like, well, even if my country has a particular set of values, well, that particular set of values is really a universal set of values from the global homo thing. So I'm actually still a particularist as I'm being invaded by a different country and they're instilling their values into my country.
yes, but there is nonetheless still a sort of universal kind of cosmopolitan culture. I think we can reasonably identify that.
No, well,
And it is something
I'm
that,
not,
that does seem to be pushed. So I
I'm
don't know if
not,
push is I don't know if push is the right word, but it is something that is appearing in the left wing of a lot of different
yes,
countries, and then
I
and then the
don't,
the various
right.
native groups of those countries saying, "What the fuck? We don't want this."
I
But
don't
it is all the same
disagree
culture.
with you. That
Okay.
is definitely happening. But I think what I'm getting at is I think if you had a global right, socially conservative culture being pushed broadly, I don't think all of a sudden the right wing people are like, well, I don't want that. Even if it completely aligns with my moral values, I don't want that because it's a global value and and I want my own country's values.
A global
That's what I'm
right?
saying.
Great point. Yeah.
Right.
That's
Like
Why?
exactly
so
what they
well, like
want.
look at far right theocratic Islam, right?
Yep.
They want a global caliphate. that all exists under one Islamic rule. I wouldn't say that that's left wing because they want some kind of global rule.
Destroyed.
No, that. So let me think about it for a minute.
Well, while you're thinking about it, I'm going to send you the link so we can watch this clip. We started watching this debate yesterday, and we stopped right when it got super interesting. So I was telling Sitch before we started, this guy is a conservative. Stephen Hicks is arguing for liberalism, and the conservative basically, Stephen Hicks responds saying everything that you just said is just kind of a mischaracterization of liberalism, which I think we get a lot from conservatives, which kind of irks me, but we can
Okay.
get Dev's response while we're here.
In the chat, someone asked, "What is global homo?" So I know everyone thinks that like that it's an LGBT thing. It's not actually. It means
Homogenization, not homosexual.
Globalization, homogenization. It's the idea that all culture should be blended together to make like one very bland, very inoffensive culture that everyone can feel welcome in, but doesn't actually have any prescriptions. And that's probably the difference. Actually, is that Islam still contains prescriptions. It's not it is a conquering culture. It's not a homogenizing culture. That's probably the difference here.
Yeah, but they want to, like, if they got their way, if the theocratic Muslim states got their way, they would conquer and then homogenize everything to their standards.
Well, sure, but okay. Conquering and homogenizing, these are two different things, right? Like homogenizing, like here, let me put it this way. Okay. So conquering would be you have the color blue and they're the Muslims, and then you have a bunch of other colors, and then you just paint over everything with blue, right? So homogenizing though is when you take all the colors and mix them into its gray. You know what I mean? That's
is that what you mean by, well, I think okay, I guess I'm thinking just like homogenizing in terms of making everything the same.
No.
Making everything uniform or similar, right?
Yeah, I understand your point.
Right.
But no, the way I'm using it in this specific context is homogenizing means making everything the same by combining everything, not by conquering and overriding.
I see. So okay, that's, and I agree with you. Yes, that I would say the right is on average more against that kind of homogenization assimilation process. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I mean by universalism versus particularism, right?
Gotcha.
What's interesting is the melting pot ideal of America is a left-wing one, but the patchwork idea of America is a right-wing one, where you have a bunch of different cultures that come in, but they nonetheless retain their cultural uniqueness. That seems to be more right-wing, despite being very pro-immigration. Which by
is
the way,
weird because that's what the leftists are advocating for right now.
I think they're sleight of handing it, to be honest.
Okay.
Sleight of handing that, but
maybe, yeah.
But anyway, so the reason that I brought this up all the way back at the start is because monarchism seems to be a particularist idea. If we're talking about universalism versus particularism, right? But so does libertarianism, even though monarchy and liberty are kind of at odds with each other. That's why they're both on the right, right? The same with the neoconservatives. They're on the right for the same reason. They all seem to be very particularist ideas. They're just different types of particularism. Meanwhile, on the left, you have socialism, you have like libertarian socialism, you have communism, you have the anarchists that are on the left, you have some liberals that are on the left, and it's because they're all some flavor of universalization. So that's where I think the right versus left spectrum actually functions at its best, because it actually accurately explains why very different ideas like communism and liberalism or monarchy and libertarianism are on the right and left respectively. The one problem with it is fascism, because fascism has a whole bunch of right-wing positions and a whole bunch of left-wing positions. And that's why I say it's centrist, but that's the pill no one wants to swallow.
Well, again, I think the difficulty is, and the example, I want to use the immigration example because I think it's a good example. If you have let's say you have let's just use Asians. Okay. So you have Asians immigrating to America, and you could say, well, currently it would seem that it'd be like more the right-wing position to say, well, the Asian families coming to America, they should try to adopt as much American culture as possible and kind of become Americanized as opposed to retaining their own culture. That's like what a right-wing American idea might be, right? You'd agree with this?
I think so, yes. Okay.
And then the left-wing person might say, no, this Asian person, they should like retain their own culture, right? They should get to do their own thing. They shouldn't have to assimilate, right? Is what the left-wing American would say. But then if you were to flip this perspective, and you were to look at it from an Asian perspective or the Asian immigrant's perspective, the left-wing Asian person might say, I don't need to necessarily retain my own culture. I should adapt and assimilate to the American culture. And it would be the right-wing Asian person that says, no, I need to protect my culture and not assimilate and be my own separate thing. And I think this is where like the confusion comes from when we have these conversations, is that you can have different people promote the same idea and they can both be on the opposite side of the spectrum depending on like who the subject is in that conversation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Julio, click on
I'm
the
not sure if
link.
that changes anything that I said though.
I think it can in terms of the particularism conversation, but Adam wants us to watch this thing, so here, let me I'll put it in the chat.
Anyway, Adam, if I did actually derail your whole thing, I'm sorry, man.
I sent you the look. No apologies here. They're unaccepted.
You didn't derail anything, but
yeah,
Well,
look.
It sounded like I did for a minute. You seem kind of mad.
I'm not angry. No, not at all. And look, I'm not a big optics guy either. Sometimes I feel like people who get involved in these conversations are kind of useful idiots for the people who are playing an optics game. That's really what I meant. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to just, I think it would be like to acknowledge the subtext and then say, like, I understand this is subtext, but this is my position. Is that what you're kind of saying? Adam?
Yeah, exactly. That's
Right.
exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Like
Well,
just acknowledge that this is a game that's being played to like pin the Nazi on my political rival. That's the game that's being played.
Oh no, that happens all the time, right? Because so I think that we've had a pretty honest conversation here about these things without worrying about where the Nazis ultimately fall on the left-right spectrum. But I guarantee you, every single libertarian who says Nazis are left-wing, they want to pin the current left-wingers who are not Nazis with the label of Nazi, and also vice versa as well.
Well,
every single time some retarded Twitteroid calls you a fascist, it's not because you actually are one; it's because it's a very useful label.
Yes,
obviously.
there you go.
Well, and to be clear, I don't think Twitter sucks or any other libertarians in our audience that's their goal is to smear the left. I think it's that they identify
as right wing. Yeah,
as they identify as right wing, and they say, well, I identify as right wing, and the reason I identify as right wing is because of my libertarian values. And that seems to completely be contradicted by Nazi not being in favor of, libertarian principles. So obviously they can't be right wing. So I just want to be clear that I think that's what's going on. I don't think Twitter sucks or anyone in our audience necessarily who's libertarian is trying to, just do this from some kind of like Machiavellian smear the left sort of tactic.
They're defending.
I think some of them do, but yeah, some of them are just being very protectionist of their own ideas for sure. Yeah.
They are defending though, because obviously culturally it's accepted that the Nazis are right wing. So they are defending against being labeled
sure.
Nazis. Yeah.
Yeah, that as well. Yeah.
I guess, but
yeah. Well, I think so. Because if you say I'm a right winger and you're just like a libertarian, and then someone calls you a Nazi, you're like, well, hold on, I'm not that.
Sure, but it's the same thing. Like just because someone identifies on the left in America doesn't make them, socialist.
Yeah, that's true too.
So,
you got to tell. Yeah, you have to tell Sargon that though, because everything's socialist.
That's
okay. Well, here's the ultimate nuanced take. Okay, there's actually like a spectrum within fascism.
Did he ever click on the? Oh, he did click on the link.
I did. I'm here. But
okay,
here, let me just give the ultimate nuanced take. Okay, so you actually do have like left fascism and right fascism within the fascist movement. There is its own spectrum inside of that movement, and so you have like left-wing fascists, like the what were they called? The Strasser brothers in Germany, right? And they're like basically all of their ethnonationalism was that left-wing variant. All of their anti-Semitism was based in anti-capitalism. They were definitely like a more socialistic version of what the Nazis wanted. And then you have like, frankly, Hitler types were much more pragmatic. They didn't really have an ideology. They just wanted power and they wanted to use it for whatever the fuck they wanted to do. They're more like the centrist Nazi types. And then you have like explicitly right-wing Nazi types who were very rare, frankly. There's some fucking retard named Ernst Junger that I had the displeasure of reading about 6 months ago, and he was very much a explicitly right-wing fascist, where basically his belief was that fascism would ultimately destroy all governments and return everyone to monkey, where they lived harmoniously in tribes. And like he was like he was what I was getting at when I was talking about post-fascism and the
Hmm.
three forms of fascism. He was
Right.
that guy. He was like he was the anarchist fascist.
Right.
So like even within fascism, there's like there's there's left-wing groups and right-wing groups, and there's feuds, and they definitely fought among themselves as well.
That is interesting. Okay.
It's time to read more esoteric, retarded
God,
literature.
please no. So, okay, so what is this clip, Adam, that we're gonna watch?
So we watched some of this yesterday. We kind of watched the intro of it. We were talking about Constantine and the Twitter drama he's involved in over the debate he had with Brianna Greyjoy and company. And this debate came up. We watched the beginning of it. We just watched, I guess, the first 12 minutes. But the thing that I liked about this debate, we never got to. Stephen Hicks comes in and basically like slaughters this other guy. So Stephen Hicks is in the liberal position, and this other guy is in the conservative position. So we're just going to witness the slaughter here. Ready?
Yep.
That thinks that it all starts with a break. And I say it's not. It's the fruits of the very order that conservatives seek to preserve.
Thank you. I want to come back to conservatism in a second, but Stephen, a flurry of punches there, so come back on this.
Well,
particularly the idea that liberalism is interfering in things like marriage and changing the way that we do things.
So, this is beautifully said, but
So the flurry of punches we're used to seeing is just liberalism is responsible for all the strife in life concerning wokeness and all of that stuff. That's basically what he says.
Mm-hmm.
three.
Right,
well,
particularly the idea that liberalism is interfering in things
actually,
like marriage and changing the way that we do things.
What?
What?
Oh shit, I was muted. Oops. Sorry. No, I was saying something. That's why I paused it. Sorry. I mean, I haven't seen this, right? So I'm going to assume his argument, to be more specific, Adam, his argument was something like liberalism has given people a bunch of freedom and a bunch of economic prosperity, and now they're like living as atomized individuals, and their rights are interfering with like communal bonds, and like, you know, the freedom to be gay is like destroying the family, is all this sort of stuff, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, I think I understand.
So,
All right.
this is beautifully said, but three huge topics put out there, and I'm going to take just the first one. Well, yes,
I started it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so but let's take this first one about the liberal mythos, right? That somehow in the Enlightenment there's this radical break with the past, and suddenly liberalism, we're all free, autonomous self. Right? That is a conservative myth about liberalism. There are no liberals. Now, John Rawls is a disaster. We'll come back to him in a moment.
He's your guy.
He is not. He is the
Rawls is the one Sargon's always trying to pin on us, Sitch.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty funny.
Wait, does he?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I've
Opposite
heard
of
him talk
my guy.
about Locke and Rousseau, but
Anyway, but that's the third topic that you are putting out there. Every single important liberal in the tradition, right? And liberalism does have its tradition. Will say, look, by the time we get to the Enlightenment, you are exactly right. The founding fathers of the United States are saying, no, we have to go back to Greece. We have to go back to Rome. There are certain long political traditions. At the same time, they are very well aware, if we are interested in religious freedom, for example, the First Amendment, I know we're in Britain, but I'm going to use this American example. In the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment, the very first thing is freedom of religion. And it's very clear that this comes out of already 2 centuries of battles over religious freedom, religious toleration, and so forth. The more broad-ranging intellectual freedoms in the sciences, for example, it's already 2 to 3 centuries of debates over whether we should be intellectually free in the sciences or not.
I'll just pause it real quick. This is funny because this is actually a Moldbug argument, but let's keep going.
That's funny.
Well, yeah. Well, Moldbug basically said that like this entire history, the American Revolution was not actually an American Revolution. It was a revolution of liberalism over conservatism, and that it actually started in the UK 200 years earlier. It's the same kind of argument. Okay.
And to artistic freedom. Are we going to censor the theaters, or are we going to allow literary people to do whatever? Already going back to the Renaissance, we have now more than 2 centuries, we have 3 to 4 centuries of debates and hard-fought battles. So what we have then is a multi-front battle with respect to the arts, with respect to the sciences, with respect to religion, with respect to all of the civil freedoms. And so, yes, absolutely, the Enlightenment is a capstone. And then there's a kind of aha moment that many intellectuals are reaching in the 1700s. After we fought all of these particular battles, now we are in a position to generalize and say, it's not just artistic freedom or religious freedom or scientific freedom or freedom to go into whatever kind of business you want. Yes, we are going to generalize to these universal principles. So the myth is, and this is often a conservative reading, that somehow we're springing de novo into existence. I don't think that's a proper reading of liberal. The liberals are proud of their history. Now, to turn the tables a little bit, if we...
So the conservative reading is that everything came out of the Enlightenment. Sargon says
like
that quite
all of the
often.
bad stuff came out, like all the wokeness.
Yeah.
Well, that's where the liberal project started, was the
Right.
Enlightenment.
That's what Sargon constantly says, that the liberal project started with the Enlightenment.
Mhm.
And he's
Stephen
saying
Hicks
the
is saying,
second
no, the Enlightenment was the climax of the liberal project, that it started in all these other different areas historically, and then once the Enlightenment happened, they could generalize about individual freedom being an overall good for society. The thing that the conservatives are always against, individual freedom. Look, and I know obviously there's a lot of libertarians who think of themselves as conservatives now. Will be like, what? I love individual freedom. But throughout
Right.
history, it's the conservatives that are saying, no, don't do that. Right?
Right. But that's why, yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's why I have a lot of contention with this sort of the idea of putting libertarians as the right-wing definitional point. That doesn't really make sense with history whatsoever.
Yeah, this
Libertarians
guy
used to be like the far left.
Stephen Hicks is the ultimate libertarian.
I
Look,
know.
and he's defending
I
the
know.
liberal position here.
I know.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's because, I mean, libertarian, as so many bread tubers love to tell you, the word libertarian was originally coined to talk about non-state socialism. So fair enough, right? People's liberty once they have like economic freedom. Okay, fair enough. I think libertarianism in America became the right-wing version that it is, basically because of the unique material circumstances that the Americans found themselves in. The natives were all dead. Some of them because you killed them, but a lot of them because they just died due to
neither
disease.
one of us accept that libertarianism is on the right. So when you say libertarian is right wing in America, it completely goes against all of my intuitions.
Okay, well, I'll explain how. Okay, if you don't mind.
No, let's just continue with the clip. Let's go forward.
Well, hold on. Is this the point of contention?
Well, no. Look, we've talked about this a million times. Okay, it's just we can talk about it after the clip. Let's continue with the clip.
This with you, but okay.
Well, we can look if you want to make an argument why. I don't want to derail the clip with an hour about why libertarians are on the left.
Okay,
or the right.
Go ahead. Let's go.
Yeah.
We then say the liberals want to say in the social order, there are going to be lots of values that are contested on and there's going to be a great deal of evolution that goes on. Where the liberals are insisting that liberty comes first is in one area and one area only. That is in the political area. When we are talking about families, when we're talking about other institutions, people might have different orders of what their values are. And we might have contending values in those social. But when we are talking about politics, specifically, when we are talking about government, we have to be very, very clear, because government is in every single society, an instrument of compulsion. It makes its rules. All other social institutions, of course, have rules, but those are rules that are flexible. You can opt in and out of business, opt in and out of a church, opt in and out of playing this or that sport. So they all have their rules, but those are particular rules for those institutions, and people voluntarily sign on to them. When we're talking about governments, we are talking about a different kind of animal, right? And it's an 800-pound gorilla animal that says our rules are going to apply to everybody in the society. And our rules, if you break one of these rules, the police are going to come to you. We will put you in jail if we find that you are wrong. And we have these rules with respect to foreign people, protecting our people. You come here, we will use our military. So when we are talking about the moral order, right? The liberals are insistent the purpose of government, all of the universal rules and the willingness to use force against anybody, it has to be only with reference to the protection of individual liberties. That's where the insistence comes in. That's where the enforcement comes in. Now,
so this is an interesting distinction that he makes. He's like, look, you can set up any sort of rules you want in these other voluntary institutions because people can opt out of those institutions, right? But in government, you can't opt out. And therefore, that's why individual freedom has to be of the highest order.
Yeah, I completely agree with this, by the way. This is 100% correct. I know the counter argument. I can present it to you if you like, but I want you to understand first, I don't agree with it, okay? Before I hear Dev is a commie in the chat. All right?
The counter argument to what?
What he just said. So he said that the liberals say that liberty comes first only for politics because all other institutions can be opt-in or opt-out, but you can't opt out of having a government.
Okay,
so you have to have a government with a certain standard. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I've heard Vosh characterize his objection to this by saying, well, socialists, liberals and socialists, we both like freedom, we both like democracy, right? Well, socialists just want more of it, which is why we want to actually expand this principle out of government and into all these other institutions as well. And so basically if this guy were to sit down beside a socialist, the socialist would say, I agree with everything you've said. I want more of what you want though. And this is how this is why Sargon looks at the relationship between liberals and socialists and says, hey, look, they're a continuation of the same thing.
Right. But would be a fallacy because that's like saying, well, if I take this medicine in the proper dosage and it cures me, but if I take too much and it kills me, well, then that means that this medicine kills me, so I should never take it.
True. So again, I'll put my Vosh cap back on, right?
Right.
Vosh would say, oh, you don't want more democracy? That means you're a fascist.
Yeah, I know, but that's what he would say, but it's retarded. Yeah, obviously.
Of course it's retarded. Of course it's retarded.
Right. Yeah, I know.
So I did a video recently about the Italian fascist phrase menefrego. Did you guys watch that one?
I did watch that one, yeah. I don't care.
Yeah,
I thought it was good. I thought it was really good. Yeah.
Right. This is kind of the impulse that they're appealing to, right? And this is why they'll always say, scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. Or why the other side will say that liberals are just communists in disguise, right? Because they think that what this guy is presenting here, this idea that liberty comes first only for politics and other institutions are opt-in and opt-out. What both the far left and the far right says when they look at this guy is they say, well, he hasn't completed the thought process yet. He hasn't fallen into one of the two camps yet.
Right.
And that's how they view liberalism they view liberalism as being in this quantum state of wanting democracy and not wanting it, wanting freedom and not wanting it, because they view government as being a fundamentally different thing than all other institutions, which it is, by the way. And in my opinion, that's the problem with monarchy. It's a problem with libertarianism. It's a problem with socialism and fascism, is they all view these things. They view government and private institutions as being the same thing. Now, what that thing is differs between the four ideologies, but they view them as being all the same thing. The liberals, and sometimes the conservatives, but generally just the liberals, they're the only ones that view government and non-government institutions as being fundamentally different down to the core. And that's what he's getting at here, I think.
We should probably move on to super chats because we got a million of them and we're running late anyway. So.
Oh. Okay. Oh, well, okay, sure.
Well, before you do super chats,
I thought you guys wanted to respond to that, but I mean, okay, sure.
Well, no, I want to go back to something you were saying with like the libertarian right wing in America thing, which I think is important because I think basically what's happened is that, America is a very weird and unique country in that we don't like conceptualize America's past as being British monarchy and then moving to liberalism and then moving to modern times. We don't view it like that. We view it as like nothing starting as liberalism. And then that's where where we are today. And I think because we have that like mental map of America in our minds, this is part of why libertarianism gets kind of cemented as like a right-wing thing in America. It's because I do believe it's more complicated, but I do believe a lot of the left-right dichotomy is change versus tradition. And from the founding of America was a very libertarian principle. And so that libertarian principle becomes the tradition of the country. And so it becomes like a quote right-wing traditional aspect to be like, oh, well, if you're more libertarian, that's more in line with the tradition of the country, therefore it's a more right-wing thing.
I think it's part of it, but I think there's more to it than that, though. I think there's actually a lot more to it than that. Um, this is what I was getting into a little bit earlier when I mentioned that, the first libertarians were socialists who were anti-state, right? And that's how it was in Europe. Like European libertarians are still this, and American libertarians are different. And I think it's because you guys just had way more room. You had a whole bunch of uninhabited land after all the natives were dead, for a variety of different reasons, but they were all gone. And you had this great expansion westward. So freedom in the American context meant going out into the wilderness that is, untamed, unclaimed, staking out a parcel of land, setting up your little farm or setting up your little shop, and running your life beyond the bounds of a central government in a very individualistic manner. That's what freedom meant in the American context.
Right.
But you didn't have that kind of growing space in Europe because it's all like settled land with kingdoms and republics and all of these governments that have already propped up. So you can't have that sort of expansion in Europe. So for them, libertarianism meant we can't flee out into an uninhabited wilderness to escape these institutions. We must work within them and make them more equitable somehow. So I think that's the difference between the two of them. And because the American type of libertarianism lends itself more to like atomized individualism, more to capitalism, more to private ownership, and the European libertarianism lends itself more to socialism. That's why they've become left wing and right wing, respectively.
Yeah, maybe. I think kind of what I was saying is kind of rooted into what you're saying in terms of like, it's not so much that like the representation of going out into the open land, it's like what the open land represents. It represents the ability to basically do whatever the fuck you want and to be outside the bounds of an external government telling you what to do, essentially. And that idea becomes kind of embedded in the American myth of what it means to be American, and that becomes embedded in tradition of American, and therefore gets conceptualized as like a conservative value, even though it's not really a conservative value that you get to do whatever you want without the government telling you not to, from like a broader philosophical perspective.
Possibly, yeah. But I mean, the whole government tells you what you're going to do. That's also like a socialist perspective in some ways as well.
Of course, that's what I'm saying. It's not the government telling you what to do is neither like authoritarianism. The government dictating what you should have to do is neither a left nor right wing philosophy. But that's my point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean that's why you have the political square and you have like the
Of course.
Stalinists in the top left, and you have like a monarchist in the top right. You have the fascists in the top center. You have to accept that at this point. But yes.
Okay. Okay.
So
Well,
actually, here, actually, here. One final question for you, Sitch.
Okay.
Okay, so here, visualize the. We don't have time to actually pull the graphic up. Visualize the square in your head, right? So we have like Vosh types in the bottom left, or like libertarian socialist types, like anarchist types in the bottom left. You
Sure.
have you have the American libertarians in the bottom right, who are like very, my property, yeehaw.
Right.
You have, let's say, liberals in the center. You have the Stalinists in the upper left, right? And you have, in your view, the Nazis in the upper right, right? So what's in the upper center? What's there?
Well, first of all, I'd say I don't know if a lot of American libertarians would even be in the bottom right.
You think they'd be in the bottom center?
Because when you say right, like on the quadrant, the left right is like the social conception of reality. So like the far right means you're like a super social conservative.
Okay, fair enough.
So
but maybe libertarians are like American libertarians are bottom center then.
Yeah, they'd be in the bottom. They'd probably be a little bit more to the right, but they'd be pretty close to the center line, I would imagine, if they're truly a libertarian.
Okay, so what would be the bottom right then, in your view?
Well, that would be people who are very, very. First of all, I think it's kind of a contradiction, but I think maybe like the Amish or something, right? Like
so like people who are like living in communes that don't have a centralized government, but they're still very conservative.
Well, actually, I don't know.
The Amish are individualistic, though. I mean, what the?
No, that's what I'm saying. I guess actually
it is a contradiction.
I don't know if there could be, in my conception, something that exists in that like exact bottom right section, because I don't know if there's a person or an ideology that's super socially right-wing conservative, but is also like, well, everyone can do whatever they want. Because to me, those are contradictions. I don't think that's possible.
So the interesting conversation about this is that you always see people try to say that either lib right or lib left is not possible.
Mhm.
I think actually they're both impossible, frankly. But
Well, liberalism is the thing that's interesting. Like liberalism starts out as a left-wing movement, but then it becomes so successful and embedded in our society that it becomes the center position that everything else kind of grows out of.
yeah, in some ways it's becoming a right-wing position, frankly.
Well,
Because
once
it's not become a tradition, right? Like
right,
here's the thing.
exactly.
So for me, like I have a saying. This is going to be Dev's law, I guess. Since we have Sitch's law, we're going to have Dev's law.
Mhm.
Dev's law is that governments should be liberal and people should be conservative. I think it's just broadly a good idea, right? Because
I understand what you
you
mean by that. Yeah.
you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I know what you mean by that. Yeah. And I've said, like, I think part of the problem with these political conversations is people kind of think that, like, there's various groups of people. There's you as an individual, you as your family, you as your community, and then like you as your government. And like people think the same value set should apply to each one. And I'm like, I don't think they should, right? Like maybe your government should have like very liberal standards, but then like the way you and your family interact should be, maybe more conservative.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
like it's one of those things where the government should not restrict your personal freedoms, but at the same time, if given the freedom to go and shoot up heroin in the street, you probably shouldn't do that.
right, you should tell your children not to do that, right?
Yes,
You should
yeah,
not do that yourself, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
you should be the conservative in restricting
Yes.
yourself from shooting
Right.
up heroin on the street. Yeah, it's
Right.
one of those things, right? So
Right.
that's generally how I view it, which is why at this point I'm like I'm liberal, but I'm also quite conservative, and I think my conservative tendencies come from the fact that I view liberalism not just as an ideology, but as a tradition in a sense. It's like,
Gotcha.
liberalism is not just, a text that we should follow. It is in
Sure.
fact the culture that I've grown up in and I want it preserved.
Sure.
So I'm conservative in that way.
Okay. So let me
If
get
that
to
makes
the.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I got you. Hold on. I gotta refresh because my window is lagging
Crash,
so
look, and
badly.
JMac gave us 50 gifted memberships. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Thank you so much, JMac, our circuit father, Daddy JMac, for the.
Oh my God,
50
JMac,
membership.
I've seen you throwing him around on everyone's channels recently, except for mine.
Oh no.
Actually, to
Well,
be fair,
no.
I haven't streamed in like 2 weeks. I've
There
been
you
really,
go.
really busy. I've been really
There
busy.
you go.
I don't know if you guys noticed, but I finally put out my Chugga Conroy video. Oh my God.
I don't watch any of that, but I will.
You have super chats about it.
Okay. Let me get to these. Adam on Twitter for 17
cool.
months says if you support A Team, you're supporting Redacted of S Class. Vote with your wallet and support S Class to stop A Team. S Class is best class. There you
True.
go. Brian, thanks so much for the $50.
Yeah.
Says
look at
Hitler's, or for the $60. So let me read them together. Hitler's Germany were socialists. It's just that they were state socialists in the same way China is, where they use private property in the service of the state, where private business work in conjunction of the people's interests through the state, but they were not left wing. They were third rail position that used whatever worked in the benefit of the state, but is highly influenced by socialism with conservative social structure. Okay.
Well, a lot of people define fascism as where
Right.
business and the state fuse. So,
Which is a terrible definition.
okay. It was a common
Yeah,
definition. but-
It's a common definition, but it's from a mistranslation of a Mussolini quote. It's dumb.
I kind of like understand where that's coming from like the corporatist model.
yeah, totally.
But then you kind of could say, well, a lot of socialism is fusing business in the state too. So I think that's why it's kind of like a confusing
Yeah.
category.
And also, like, there was that James Lindsay versus Destiny debate where James Lindsay tries to basically say that public-private partnerships are fascism per Mussolini's definition. I'm
right,
like,
that was not.
that means every
correct,
single government is a fascist government then through the
Right.
entirety of history. Like, that's so stupid.
Right.
Does fascism serve the people though in the same way that communism purports to do, or does it serve the party elites?
It certainly purports to serve, the people. It's just that the people are one like nationality or one ethnic group or something.
Yeah, but does it serve them equally or does it serve them hierarchically? With fascism.
Okay. Oh God.
Because I mean, if it serves them equally, why is it just not called communism?
Fascism purports to serve them both equally and hierarchically.
Fascism does?
That's what they claim. It doesn't, obviously, but in their political theory, that is the claim that they make.
Interesting.
Their claim basically is that because hierarchies are inevitable, the only valid hierarchies are state hierarchies. And if everything is brought into the state and everyone takes their proper place within the state, they will still be in a hierarchy, but from the point of view of the state, they will all be equal as components of it.
So fascism supports hierarchy, and communism is about flattening hierarchy.
No, not it's still not quite that simple, because the fascists basically view the hierarchy as cementing in place and then becoming its own form of equality.
Yeah, but that sounds like it's kind of like saying it's like fuck, was that the book where they like breed the people genetically to match their social class?
Yes. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Fuck,
Brave New World.
Brave New World. Yeah, right. So like it sounds like the fascists saying like, well, we need Brave New World where we kind of cement your status, and then once you're in your correct social status, you'll be happy. But I wouldn't call that equal. Obviously, that's completely the opposite of equal. Whatever, like if they say it's equal, that's just them kind of abusing the language.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you there, right? That's why I said they don't actually like their political theory basically says if everyone takes their proper place in the hierarchy and stops trying to go up or
They'll
down
be
it,
happy and find
they'll
fulfillment.
they'll all be happy. They'll find fulfillment, but also it will become its own form of equality because the
They're playing
social
with language, though, obviously.
their view is the social pressures that generate out of inequality will disappear. So the word equality will have no more meaning.
I see. Well, I get that, but I would say that like when we're kind of trying to describe it, I think it's more useful to say like, well, we would
Say what it
broadly
is.
say,
Yeah.
socialism wants to find hierarchies, fascism wants to cement hierarchies, and I would just kind of dismiss like they say that, but that's bullshit, obviously.
Yeah, totally.
I would just kind of dismiss it.
Well, I wouldn't dismiss it though, because I think this is one of the reasons why left-wingers view monarchy and fascism as the same thing. Because the monarchists said, we'll have our hierarchy and you'll just take your place in it and you'll suck it. And I don't care how you feel about it, frankly. The fascists said, no. This is utopian, actually. All right. When you take your place in the hierarchy, your life will actually be better.
No,
right?
I get it, but it's like
it's still bullshit.
And then they basically say like all class distinctions will dissolve within the structure of the state. And even though you'll be on different levels in terms of like who runs a workplace or something, you're all going to be equal relative to the state itself.
I get it. Yeah, there's like the monarch, and I understand there is a distinction, right? The monarch is saying, I'm at the top dog, everyone else sucks farts beneath me, and you just have to suck it up. And the fascists who are kind of advocating for a similar system are saying, no. Once you get all subsumed, like at the end of Neon Genesis, into the giant, conglomerate being that is the state, even if you're like technically lower status, you're so subsumed in part of the body of the state that you will feel like that everything is equal. Like, and I get it.
Yeah.
So it's like a weird situation where
that's
like
their political theory. Yeah.
Right. So on one hand, like I get it that it's different, but on the other hand, it's like practically not different, even if they're making an excuse. But anyway, we can move on. It is an interesting distinction. Thoughts Apprentice for $5 says they were right-wing socialists. It's a syncretic ideology. They were Hegelian, so they took rightist social beliefs and leftist economic beliefs. Brian for $60. Thank you so much for the $60, Brian. Says, disagree with you, Sitch. From our founding, we had a distrust of the government. The right has a pick yourself up by your bootstraps motto. It's not that we think the government is left-wing. The government will always suck at solving my problems when compared to me. As a side note, Hitler didn't like communists because their ideology was borderless global ideology, where Hitler and Mussolini believed in state socialism only for their citizens. Well, I think like regarding this, the first part, the distrust of government that was kind of embedded, I should say, into our founding was because we were fleeing a right-wing monarchy, right? Yep. And so we were saying, well, we don't want to recreate a strong, centralized, right-wing monarchy based on the idea that like there's a clear hierarchy with the king at the top and everyone else underneath. And then you get kind of confused because now the perception is, well, the strong central government is not enacting a right-wing natural hierarchy that you would from a monarchical standpoint, but like is forcing a left-wing perspective down. And so I guess that's kind of why there's like this confusion in terms.
Yeah, there's a decentralization of power that took place. It doesn't really, centralized power and decentralized power could be a spectrum, but it doesn't map onto left and right well, because I think the left and the right both want to centralize power, but in different ways.
Well, only if it's I think both
Only
left
if
and
it
right want.
serves them. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Obviously,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. It's
The
very
left wants to
pragmatic.
the left wants to centralize power to flatten hierarchies. The right wants to centralize power to solidify hierarchies.
Right, or
Right?
traditions or
Yeah.
whatever. So the social conservative.
So where does that put the
philosophy.
people who want to decentralize power?
It puts them against whoever the power is at the moment. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Libertarian. I mean, and that's why like we had that weird situation, if you guys remember, where there was the devil statue, the Satanist statue in the courthouse, and all the conservatives lost their mind, right? And they all said
Yep.
they all wanted to say, fuck the First Amendment. We should get this out of the state courthouse. And if you're libertarian, you should be like, well, I mean, I'm libertarian and freedom of speech, secularism, right? So
well, this is why I think a lot of the American right wing are moving away from libertarianism and more towards reaction right now.
I agree with you completely. Yeah. Libertarian Sasquatch for $2 says, are HOAs leftist or conservative? I would say neither definitionally. It kind of depends on what goals and policies they would be in favor of. So
They're in the centralized power realm, though.
right, they are. That's true. They're more authoritarian. Antelope for 2 months says classical fascists were authoritarian centrists, only caring about the state. Nazis were a separate kind of fascist and more explicitly right wingish. Yeah, I mean, I've heard that argument. That's what God, what's his name?
Me.
No, did you? Maybe you said that. Who's the?
You mean Tick? Talking about Tick?
No, fuck, not Tick. Tick does not say that whatsoever.
Oh, okay, I thought he did. But all right.
No, Tick is like the Nazis are all left wing guy. Ryan Chapman. That's what Ryan Chapman says. Yeah, and Ryan Chapman seems pretty smart. So, and Dev seems kind of smart too. So if Dev says that,
Oh, well, thank you.
Blanche for $20 says it's possible for a left winger to be racist. It's possible for a right winger to appreciate multiple cultures. To place them singly on one side or the other is a mistake. You have to look at the philosophies. Yeah, no, obviously, I think both sides can be racist. I think the racism just manifests for different reasons, and for different causes, essentially. As I said, the right is I want to protect my own race culture from being degenerated, and the left is my own race culture is bad and is causing problems. So I kind of want to, adopt a different policy, a different cultural policy. Stock for $5 says, if you're going to drop the left-right labels for economics, I think you should drop it for social policies, attitudes too, for clarifying it, nothing else. I mean, I'm not dropping it. I just think it all has to be on what it's in service of. What is the goal? What is the intent of the policies? What is the intent of the philosophies? What is it trying to manifest in the world? That's how I think things should be categorized.
How they're useful. Yeah. Useful for communication.
Magor for 16 months says property rights can be authoritarian too. In ancient Rome, their religion obligated them to sacrifice some harvest to ancestors buried on their land. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, that is a very fascinating idea. I don't know how to think about that. You need to sacrifice some amount of your crops to like the dead people. And Antelope for $5 says Mussolini's original classic fascism was only about the worship of the state, nothing else. Dev made a really good video on fascism.
Cool.
Thank you. I've made many.
Brian, I almost said Hitler. Brian for $10. Thank you. Says Hitler's Germany brought about the idea of racial superiority from the idea of eugenics. They thought they could expunge the world of its ills through eugenics, and that idea was pushed by the left.
That's a good point.
Well,
yeah, eugenics kind of came out of the scientific method, which was like an Enlightenment thing. Yeah.
Eugenics within itself is neither a left nor right idea. So because there definitely was the left progressive movement in America that was originally pushing for eugenics. But again, it was pushing for it in terms of, we want to have everyone be like super geniuses. We want a society where everyone's like a super genius and not sick, right? And the right was like, I should say Hitler, I should say the right. The Nazis were like, we need to use this to, they weren't selecting for fitness, right? They were selecting for Aryanness, which then they kind of backwards worked out to be a selection for fitness, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in both cases, though, it's still an attempt to, let's say, micromanage society top down to get like
definitely
certain outcomes,
100%,
as opposed to just letting people do whatever they want and let the chips fall where they may. So
Yes, yeah,
you can have
eugenics.
different definitions that makes it left or right. Yeah, yeah.
Well, again, I mean, eugenics. Now, I don't think eugenics is a left or right policy. Eugenics is definitely an anti-libertarian philosophy, obviously, because it's anti you doing whatever you want. So, Grendel Vivat for $50. Thank you so much. Says, to expand on what Stug said a while ago, I think we need an XYZ graph with various spectrums: liberal versus conservative, authoritarian versus anarchy, and individualist versus collectivist. Trying to fit everything into just one seems to be creating a bottleneck.
Hell yeah.
Maybe. I still think that there is a broad left-right dichotomy that exists. And I guess maybe it's not good because I say it like it exists, but then there's the asterisk, and libertarians just don't exist on that spectrum. So maybe we need more.
Yeah, I think like 6, 7 spectrums. More spectrums are better because there are all these different criteria for measuring left and right. And it's best if you can find things that are at odds with one another, that are truly like opposites.
You know what, guys? I think the left wing is actually coming around to the mold bug position on this conversation, frankly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Let me just post this to you, okay?
What is the mold bug position?
Everything post-enlightenment is left wing. And everything pre-enlightenment is right wing. But yeah, so this is from a political science lecture at the University of Michigan.
You said that Stephen Hicks was making that argument, but he's not making that argument. Stephen Hicks was saying that the left-wing position.
Actually, Adam.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, that was just a joke.
Oh,
but no, this guy though. This guy that I posted in the chat though. This professor here, Matt McManus, he's saying a huge chunk of right-wing discourse can be boiled down to the right wing still hasn't accepted the French, the sexual, or the civil rights revolution. And I'm like, that's getting pretty close to the everything that is post-enlightenment is left-wing idea that Moldbug put forward.
So look,
that seems to be
what Moldbug is saying is a mischaracterization of the liberal position by conservatives, just like Stephen Hicks laid out in the video.
Yes, that's true. However, what I'm saying here is that even if that's that position, even though it's a mischaracterization, is what, let's say, the dissident right has taken up as.
Yeah, of course they like mischaracterizing the left. Why wouldn't they?
Well, sure. But this
why are you
because
why are you so invested in this mischaracterization of liberalism?
No. What you're saying is like, so I understand what you're saying. You're saying like when Richard Wolff, so for a long time the conservatives would say, whenever the government does something, that's socialist, right? And it's like, okay, that's not. It's obviously not true. That's a mischaracterization. But then Richard Wolff comes along and he sees value in that mischaracterization, and then he starts using that to define socialism, right? He keeps saying whenever the government does something, that's socialism, because he thinks that will convince kids to be socialist. And so you're saying that basically now, the Mencius Moldbug people would mischaracterize and say like, well, everything after the Enlightenment is leftism, is left wing. And even though it's not true, and then now the leftists are seeing some kind of value in agreeing with that mischaracterization.
Yeah, because now the leftists can say, "Oh, you're a right winger. Does that mean that you're against everything we've built in the past 100 years? What kind of terrible person are you?" So they're gonna start beating them with that. That is, right. I think, like I'm looking at this tweet right now, and it's slowly taking off. I think this will, in the next 3 to 5 years, become the mainline view from both the left and the right on what the left and the right is.
But is it good to...
Moldbug's going to win, unfortunately.
Is it good to give in to the mischaracterizations on either side?
No.
Obviously, people are using them for political expediency, but you're not getting closer to the truth.
Sure. Right. Ostracy for $5 says, behind the stream, but Such's hierarchy statement means Soviet Russia actually is right-wing. Good to know. I'm not sure I exactly follow. You'd have to expound on that. Magora for $5 says, probably more accurate to say property ownership can be authoritarian. It's very hard to sell land in ancient Rome. Source, the ancient city. Okay. Edward Sr. for $10 says, isn't the purpose of this discussion to expose the hypocrisy of Marxists supporting Palestinian property rights? I'll be honest, I don't remember what was the original purpose that Twitter Sucks wanted to necessarily discuss coming on, but if that was the purpose, that went over my head. If it was to expose the hypocrisy of Marxists supporting Palestinian property rights, which I think is hilarious, but
here's the thing. I think like a lot of the socialist left in the West, they support all of these little dissident movements, even if they might be right-wing movements, because they view them as useful tools to tackling the global capitalist machine.
Yes, because they just hate liberalism so much. Yeah,
Yep.
sure. Jonathan Smith for $10 says Nazi National Socialists never described themselves as fascist. They blended a national ethnicism and socialism. They had an early alliance with conservatives, which toned down the socialism first. Is that true that Nazis never identified as fascist, like with Mussolini or anything?
No, they didn't. That was a
Oh,
little
interesting.
pushed on them basically because they joined up in World War II. In fact, at the very start, like I think there was a fascist government in a country that the Nazis invaded, and they basically killed all the fascists there. And Mussolini was pissed
Interesting.
about it. They were almost enemies in World War II.
Hmm.
Which I mean, by the people are saying that makes them opposites. Listen, guys. All right, socialists kill socialists all the time. Okay, fascists killed fascists all the time. There's always infighting. There's always different groups. It's just how this stuff goes.
Right. Statutory 8 for 11 months says, do left and right wing really mean anything anymore? Both furthest parts of the spectrum don't seem to like individual rights. Well, I mean, I agree with you 100%. That's kind of my point. So,
I think
Yeah,
that's what he
this
was
is
getting at
how
with
libertarians bounce back and forth.
but right. But I guess the problem is that some people want to put individual rights on one end of the spectrum, and I just don't like on the left right spectrum. And in America, the terms left and right are too embedded in our ideas of meaning something different that we can't necessarily do that and communicate and be like, no one know what the fuck you're talking about, essentially, if you do that when you have a conversation. So, Thaw for $20. Thank you so much. Says Adam is being a flamer. Badoom. Oh, you had the fire on. Twitter sucks. Hey, Twitter sucks. For $2 says my main point was private property is right wing. Oh, gotcha. Well, which I guess we just disagree with. So I disagree with that completely. But
Is there left-wing private property?
well, the original concept of private property was left wing
What do you mean?
because
They
the
call
original
it
point was there was no private property.
neoliberalism.
There was just the king's property. You didn't have access to private property.
Yeah,
And the
economic
king was
freedom.
chosen by God or something.
I mean,
So-
I guess, but I think they still characterized it like as his private property, you know?
Yeah, but is it really okay? I mean, I guess you could say, well, technically it's private property, but it's like, is it really, does a society have a concept of private property if only one person has access to it? I would say
Yeah,
no.
I think so because you have multiple kings with multiple little nations, and
Yeah, but the
they all have
king
their
is
own
the
private property.
state. If the king is the state and the king has all the private property, how is that private property if he's also the state? That means that when you say something is state property, it means something different in a liberal democracy versus a monarchy.
Private property comes out of individual rights, the
Right.
cornerstone of liberalism. They call it neoliberalism for a reason.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
So-
understand that, right? I understand
Yeah.
that. It's just that like it's different when a government owns all the property and administers it on behalf of the people, you know, the masses, versus when a king owns the property and just owns it for himself, and you just happen to be living on it by his good graces. Like
Well,
these are
but
two
the-
different ideas.
Yeah, but the king, whenever we argue the monarchs, I would say the king is supposed to still be acting within the benefit of the people in the kingdom, right?
That's true. Yes. He still has like if we're talking about like the idea of a good king versus a bad king, the good
Sure.
king is the one who actually
Right.
does what his people want them want and represents them well basically and make sure he's not like enriching himself off of them unduly or something. But he still owns the property in the end.
Yeah, but okay. I think we have to prevent ourselves from falling prey to word thinking. We get
Yes.
stuck in like the word as
Thank
opposed to
you.
the concept, right? And so
Okay,
like
what's the concept here?
yeah, so someone could make the argument, say, well, technically, and this is kind of the Moldbug argument, technically it's private property, even if one person owns everything and no one else can own anything. And it's like, well, I don't see how that's different. If that person who owns everything is the state, that's no different than saying the state owns everything. It's just that one person is the state. The concepts are the same. Where the concept of private property that we're talking about in modern times is that you as an individual have the ability to own a piece of land, a property, which you can, do whatever, not whatever, but do, essentially whatever you want as long as you're not infringing on
Whatever.
freedom. right?
Oh,
So
anything.
so they're very, so just to be clear, these are incredibly different concepts, and I think it's word thinking to say like they're the same when they're completely different.
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
I guess what I mean though is like this is the same critique that a socialist would levy against liberal society, right? Because we do have a situation right now where more property is being accumulated in the hands of fewer owners. Corporations are getting bigger, rich are getting richer, people don't own their houses anymore. It's the same type of criticism where we can get to a society that functions exactly like a feudal society, but through completely liberal means.
I don't think you can actually, but
I think you can,
there's
absolutely.
a difference between saying that like, well, there's a top-down structure that dictates that the king owns everything, and then he can sort of like in a Game of Thrones kind of way say like, you are the protector of this piece of land that is still mine, but you're the protector of like this, thing, like you are lord of this area, even though it's still mine. Okay. And it's all still the king's. That's very different than saying like, well, anyone can just work and make enough money and be successful enough that they can buy land. And there's corporations and people that are more successful than other people that just buy more land in a kind of bottom it's not top down prescription. It's a bottom up prescription or bottom up system.
Well, sure.
Say.
But I mean,
so
imagine a future where, let's say, a dozen housing companies owns all the houses in the United States, and you could buy one, but none of them are going to sell. All you can do is rent from them.
Okay, well then sure.
It's the same system.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, if we get to some kind of weird dystopian system, I guess you could get to essentially recreating that system. Sure.
Yeah, I mean
sure.
that's a common socialist critique of liberalism is that
we're not there yet, so
if you centralize enough wealth into the hands of a few people, which liberalism can allow to happen, then you do end up recreating the same social structure of feudalism, just without the god part, basically.
Okay,
or the king part.
That's fair, but I think that's why we have regulations and ways of preventing that and wealth redistribution to prevent all these things. Yeah. So okay, fair enough. Solid for $2 says, is the Lockean proviso a valid limitation on property rights?
Oh God, you want to talk about it?
I don't even know what the Lockean proviso is. But...
Okay, so do you know Locke's?
We're running super late here, so
we are. This is a philosophy question. Do you want to get into it or no?
Well, let's not get into it. Let's not get into it.
I'd like to wrap up in like 15 minutes. So
sorry, dude.
Sorry, Saul.
Maybe we should just do we have any super chats for Dev? Maybe we should just read those and then we can move on.
Let me see. Nomad for 13 months says roast Dev.
Well, that's
also,
what's
the program? Also, Adam, what's the program that you're using to have those effects on you? I'm buying webcam soon. S-Class is yeah. A-Team is yep.
I have a snap camera, but it broke, and I had to kind of Mickey Mouse it together. So I don't know that you can just use this program.
Dialogue Always for $5 says, Dev, do you not understand the difference between bringing diverse people into your society and the idea of, quote, living space?
I mean, yeah, but I don't know what that's in reference to be honest.
I'm not sure I get it either.
Yeah.
Let's see. John Watts for 14 months says, the Chugga video never had been so fascinated by people I don't care about, Dev.
I've heard people really like that video, despite it being cringe central.
Mm-hmm.
You guys should watch it one day.
I will.
Wait, you should watch it on this show.
Oh,
do a
okay.
16-hour react to my 2-hour drama video about Chugga Conroy.
Okay. Moondoggy for $10 says, Dev is a treasure. Look at his fat cheeks.
Thanks.
Silver Camaro 78 for $5 says, Dev, tell Adam and Sitch about how you wear a diaper. It's okay, Dev, that they're your friends. We still all love you, even if we don't get your obsession. Is this true?
This guy is trying to force the Devs in a diaper meme. Let's not do it this time, okay, guys?
That's okay. So it's not true. It's just a meme.
It's not true.
Okay. Silver Camaro 78 for another $2 says, say it loud and proud. D Club stands for diaper. Okay, well, there you go. Listen, maybe he's got a diaper fetish. He just really wants you to sort of embody.
To join in.
Fetish. Yeah.
To be his diaper brother.
J Macker, so we got follow for $20. Thank you so much. Says, what political quadrant supports big and stinky, Dev? Or are you too much of a coward to say? Quit dodging. Also, didn't forget you. Still working on your fitness program. Just been busy. Heart.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. Okay, so Big and Stinky comes from the Chugga Conroy video.
Oh,
He,
gotcha. Okay.
Since you guys probably won't watch the 2 hour video,
I'm gonna watch it.
I'll give you the 30-second TLDR. Wait,
Okay.
do you care? Or do you care if I
Not
spoil it?
really.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
fine.
not really.
So here's the spoilers. Okay.
No, that
Chugga
meant I didn't want to
Conroy-
hear
No, we
it.
don't really want to
Oh.
hear it, is what we meant.
Oh,
But
oh.
look, Dev, you are welcome to come on again. We usually try to stream for like a couple hours during the week, so we're
Right.
already hitting like hour 3 here. So
Oh,
We
I don't
Yeah.
know how long you guys.
this is
go
not
during
this
the
is not
week.
like a Sunday stream where we just like stream for
Go
10
forever,
hours.
yeah.
Go forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
So we're
sorry
we're
about
on a
this. I don't know what's
schedule
going on.
here.
Sorry.
No,
Not
that's
a
fine.
bit-
Listen, I still
Look,
love you,
it's
Dev. Okay.
yeah. Well, and
I still
look,
want you to hold me in your arms while you
and
wear a diaper.
come on and talk to us for a couple hours another day. So
Yeah.
Sure.
or
sure,
come on
sure.
or come on the
Absolutely.
Sunday stream where you can just gab and gab and gab for as long as you want.
Forever.
Yeah, look,
Forever.
I'll go
Like,
out.
do-
I'll go out and
do
get
I-
takeout. I mean, it'll be great.
Do I gab too much for you, Adam? Is that a problem?
Well, only when we're on a schedule. So you're
Okay,
like,
fair enough.
I'm trying to
fair
get done in like 15 minutes, and you're like, let me tell you about the philosophical history of fascism.
enough. Let's do it. Okay,
No, let's not do
fine,
it.
fine. I'll say one last thing then, okay? And then I'll
Okay,
shut
let's
up.
hear it.
One last thing. You should actually schedule my video for a Sunday show because it'll be a great fun time. But here's the thing: it's not politics. It's all YouTuber drama, but it's at least hilarious.
Okay.
Well, we do
I'll
like YouTube.
Watch it and think
drama.
about it.
I think I might have watched this video. I'm pretty.
I haven't seen
look,
it yet.
It's funny because YouTube drama, you have to say, "Oh, I'm not interested in that," but everyone watches it. So
Yeah. Well,
True.
I had to re-upload it because I got flagged down by one of the fucking people that I criticized. So I took out the edgiest joke was like a Buffalo Bill joke about a trans person. I took that out, and hopefully YouTube will keep it up this time.
We can hope.
Hopefully.
Asha C for $5 says, I feel like Dev is outlining my liberal governments are good, but liberal culture sucks statement.
Yeah, probably.
Twitter Secretary says, Dev, you and I should chat on Discord sometime. Want to talk to Twitter Sucks? That's who was on the call when you came in.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, those are all the Dev specific ones.
all right, we'll
So-
say goodbye to Dev. Thank you
Does it
for
mean-
coming on.
Does it mean you're kicking me out now?
It does. It
It does, yeah.
I can't
but
stay
look,
here and derail
like I
every other
said,
super chat.
like I said, we'd love to talk. We'd love to talk to you again. We'll definitely have you on again many times, over and over, because we love
Forever.
having you.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Okay, I'll see you next time.
Thanks for coming on, Dev. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. See ya.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Okay. Where was I? I was probably more the purpose
What?
discussion.
Oh, sorry. I derail you.
Dialogue always for $5 says, I think the left is more realistic about the inevitability of property rights. Over time, we will have more land owned than available. I think that's what Dev was kind of saying, where he was like, the left's argument is that it can become, feudalism again via capitalism, which I agree is like possible, but I don't think we need socialism to prevent it. I think we can just do that under liberal regulations. So
Look, and I've said this a million times. I hate that the right constantly calls social welfare programs socialism because they were
right.
invented to prevent people from voting for socialism.
right.
Yeah.
Thal for $20 says, if the guests want to have BS philosophical discussion, he would be S class. Zing. Wow. Thal coming out hard for me. Oof. An Antelope for $10 says, there's no quote right or left. Geopolitics prove that's what's left and what's right changes on where you are. In South America, for example, communists are often very nationalist and anti-global cooperation. So I agree. Well, I guess this is why I'm trying to conceptualize. I think this is where the confusion comes from. I think that there is a quote, two different moral intuitions that are embedded in people on average. And that's what me and Adam are trying to figure out what is left and what is right. Are there these moral intuitions that are universal? But that doesn't mean that you can't have people on left and right advocate for the same thing, but for different reasons.
Yeah. And
I
you
think
explain that many, many times with many examples.
Right. And I think that's sort of the thing. And that's what kind of trips people up is that, yeah, you can have someone on the left and right can advocate for the same thing, but for completely different reasons. And it's the reason, in my mind, is what kind of gives you the left or right definition. So
Yeah. That's the fuel for the whole. The intuition is basically fueling the behavior.
Exactly. Ostracy for $5 says Sitch's whole private property argument is poor. Feels very everything is political, so the degree to which it is desired doesn't matter. Again, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but Nomad for 13 months says roast. Oh, I read that one. D5280 for 7 months says to all the Christians, happy Sacred Heart of Jesus month. Okay.
Is that because of pride? I'm not in.
I'm down.
I
don't know what that means. Lost Library book for $5 says ethnonationalism is usually right wing because it reacts to the threat of change coming from within or from immigration, thus fundamentally conservative. That's
wow.
Good point. I think that's a good way of phrasing it. That's a better way of trying to phrase what I was saying about how, I think the right's intuition is to view the generation from outside coming and then degenerating the internal structures. So, but that is true.
Yeah. And that is a chief difference.
Right.
It also hits both change and the conservatives like what is familiar and liberals like what is new. So it kind of hits that as well. Yeah.
Exactly. Cecil Graham, thanks so much for joining the Free Will Seekers. Dialogue always for $5. Oh, I read that one. Fall for $20. Thank you. Says PSA Sitch doesn't know his Nazi history and policies. How dare you, Sitch? So bigoted. A-team reigns supreme. Well, that's fair. I don't know the extent of Nazi history policies to the extent of Dev has, who's done a lot more research on it. So, because Dev's obviously is sympathetic to Nazis. Oh, Orca for $5 says I left the Streamlab on the potentially criminal talks. Sorry, I couldn't find it if you responded. Adam, particularly Hart, take my money. Hi, Wormagol. I'll go and.
Wormy says hi.
That.
Well, no, we probably did respond to it. He said he couldn't find it.
I did. It was the Under the Skin is Stinky movie one. I did read that.
Oh, it was? One. Okay. Yeah. We responded.
Yep. Brian for $50. Thank you so much, Brian. He gave a lot of money today. Thank you. Yeah, I can give a lot of money.
Yeah, holy cow.
So thank you so much, Brian. Says, I understand your position, Sitch. I just disagree with your axiom that ethnonationalism is de facto right wing. If a country was communist in every sense, but are ethno-nationalists, you would say they're right wing, and I think that is wrong. Well, I would say again, it would depend on what the primary goal is. So if the primary goal, like the animating force of society was to say, we need to flatten all hierarchies so that we can exist in one sort of unified class with no elites, but we think only white people can accomplish that. And we think that, all the other non-whites, don't have the physical, mental capacity, biological capacity to exist in our, utopian stateless society. Then I would actually say, well, no, even though they're ethno-nationalists, it seems like the ethno-nationalism is in service to the socialism, is in service to the flattening of all hierarchies. So I would say that is a leftist society. And I actually said, and I said this like a long time ago, I said it's weird because when you hear Richard Spencer speak, I almost feel like that's Richard Spencer's position. It seems like his white nationalism is really in service of like a weird socialist utopian concept. So.
What a weirdo.
Right. To me, it's all what is the primary animating energy behind all the policies. So that's the key question. Rowan Phillips for 23 months, thanks so much, says the fasci bundle of sticks is meant to show how one stick is weak, but the whole is unbreakable. We are strong and weak at the same time, PM. That is true.
Oh, yeah. Look at that.
That's true.
Ultimate collectivist.
Ostracy for $10 says, so the current Democratic Party that supports DEI wokeism is both left-wing, the current Democratic Party that supports DEI wokeism is both left-wing, white Democrats self-hating, and right-wing, non-whites hating whites. Ethno-nationalism being right-wing is just wrong. You are correct that in terms of the first part, that you can have both a movement be a combination of left and right-wing people advocating for the same thing. You're correct. That does fall in line with what I'm saying. But that doesn't mean that ethno-nationalism being right-wing is just wrong. It depends on who is advocating for the ethno-nationalism. If you're white and you're advocating for a white ethno-state, then again, I'd say that makes you right-wing. If you're black and advocating for a black ethno-nationalist state, that would again make you right-wing, if that's your primary animating goal. So
There's a problem here too, because the right could be in favor of multi ethnicities, but one culture, and that would be perceived as ethno-nationalism, even though it's not really, right?
Yeah, no. So I would say it's a more right-wing policy to say, like, I think the traditional American idea, the melting pot idea, is a more right-wing idea. Is to say that, yeah, like, okay, you can immigrate to America, but you need to adapt and assimilate to our culture, right?
Our ethnicity, like in
Well, no,
quotes,
no, they're
right?
saying anyone of any ethnic group. If you were to say anyone of any ethnic group can come to America, but they need to adapt to American culture and American
Any
ideals,
any
right?
race would have to adapt to our, well, culture, I
Yes,
guess
right,
would be a better word.
right.
Different
I would
ethnicities, one culture. Yeah.
Yes, I would say that that is intrinsically a more right-wing idea, and I'd say that's also intrinsically what was the more quote American idea, and that's an idea that I certainly agree with.
So then the spectrum would be multiculturalism and monoculturalism, but inside the monoculture, you would have multiple ethnicities.
You've lost me.
Okay. So multiculturalism on the left is obviously a lot of different ethnicities, but also a lot of different cultures, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
On the right, you have American culture, right? Inside the American culture, it's monoculturalism, one culture, with a lot of different races, ethnicities, skin colors.
Yes. Yeah, right.
So this is, I think, where the objection comes in, because a lot of people on the right are like, yes, that's what I'm for. I'm for
Okay, well, that's good.
monocultures
Right.
with many different races and ethnicities, and I don't like being labeled an ethno-nationalist because it doesn't fit.
No, you are 100% correct, and that
Yeah.
actually kind of came up in our conversation, or on the conversation when I jumped in that panel with the socialists, because they want to label me saying I'm in favor of a more people assimilating to an American monocultural idea. They want to say that makes me
Ethno-nationalist.
an ethno-nationalist or fascist. I'm saying no. But I acknowledge that to the further the right to the monoculture idea is the ethno-nationalist idea, because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there's very few ethno-nationalists that I've ever heard talk who are like, oh, I want everyone to be white, but then all the white people can all have their own completely different ideas about how society is run, right? I've never heard any white nationalists say that.
They still, look, they want the monoculture. And look, and this goes back, I think the root thing driving this is newness versus familiarity.
Yes,
like the right wants familiarity. They want all the same kind of faces. They want all the same kind of outfits. They want all the same kind of architecture, right?
Mhm.
And the left is driven by, they want all kinds of new things, all kinds of different things. So I do think that's the root intuition that's driving this. But I actually like the fact that so many people on the right are like, want to fight against that racist label that's so easily placed upon them.
That is good.
Yeah, it is good.
Because but I think it's an important thing that you kind of stumbled upon, is that like the ethno-nationalists, I wonder, I don't know if like the driving concept with the ethno-nationalists is that they care about so much about skin color, or rather it's just that they want there to be a monoculture, but they just don't think that non-white people
can participate in that monoculture.
Because they believe that the culture is embedded in some kind of genetic DNA or something.
Yeah. So, that's the far right. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
John Watts, thanks so much for the 14 months, says Chuck. Oh, I read that one. Katie Nova for 5 months says, could it not be horseshoe theory? It's always horseshoe theory. That nobody guy for 9 months says, I was raised Mormon. I'm no fan. The amount of misinformation about Mormons I see online is wild. They're absolutely Christians with just DLC. Well, to be clear, I wasn't labeling all Mormons. When I brought up Mormons, I was talking about there's a very specific Mormon cult or subdivision. I guess
Latter-day LDS is Latter-day Saints.
It was was it the LDS?
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Be sweet.
No, LDS is the normal one. LDS is just Mormonism.
Be Sweet, I think, is the name of the documentary, though.
Yes, Be Sweet is the normal one, but they're the FLDS. Sorry, yeah. So I was talking about the Be
Fundamentalist.
Sweet. Yeah, yes, exactly. I was talking about the Be Sweet documentary. They were talking about the FLDS. I wasn't throwing any shade at all Mormons or anything. Twitter sucks for $5. Thank you, Twitter. Says, I'm going to have to think about your definition, Sitch, because I've never seen the exclusivity of the right wing being ethno-nationalist. Well, I don't think it doesn't have to be, but I think as you get further right, I guess the way to conceptualize it is if exclusivity is a naturally right-wing tendency, as you get more and more and more exclusive, it just seems like naturally it's going to fall into a type of ethno-nationalism. Like that's going to be like the bottom level. As you get the more and more extreme, you're always going to kind of go in that direction of exclusivity. So
Yeah,
it was good talking to you, Twitter Sucks. It's an interesting conversation. Twitter Sucks $102 says this donation was placed using the company card.
Oh my God. Don't get yourself in trouble, man.
There you go. Gene the Angry Penguin for $5 says this conversation reminds me that any second we could be wiped out of existence by a random act of nature and depressed it didn't happen earlier today. Shame on you. It was a good conversation, Gene. An Antelope for $2 says the paradox of multiculturalism, global homo. There you go. Twitter Stocks for $10 says, is the Uyghur genocide in China right wing? They're all Chinese. I just can't perceive this idea that homogeneity, I can't say that word, is right wing. The left wing wants the same thing. So,
the Uyghur genocide, they're not, it's Han Chinese that is the predominant ethnicity. They're Chinese, but it's a different ethnicity of Chinese, and they're also Uyghur Muslims. So,
well, no, I'm going back to, because we're talking about like the monoculture, because obviously like the socialists want a monoculture too. They just want it to be a socialist monoculture.
Well, yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah, they do kind of want.
Right.
Yeah. But they want different they both want the same thing. Different ethnicities, but a monoculture.
So I guess the monoculture is just, that's not a left right wing thing. That's an authoritarian thing. And again, you have to ask yourself, what is the monoculture in service to? Right. Like what is the culture? What is the culture that's the monoculture, what they want it to be necessarily?
Flattening hierarchies or embedding hierarchies. Solidifying hierarchies.
Right. Now, I guess you kind of get into problem because like a lot of these communist countries in practice, none of them are really like communist China isn't really doing anything to flatten hierarchies and to kind of live out the communist creed. Is it?
Of course not. No.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why we would say communism sucks. Is it can never, not only does the ideology suck, even if it was implemented correctly, but it can never actually be implemented correctly because they don't understand how power works. And communism will not function until, maybe you have some magical Star Trek utopia where there's no, money or, I'm sorry, you have replicators or something with free energy. But so, excuse me. So the Uyghur thing, going back to that for a second, it depends what is the intention behind the Uyghur, capture, genocide, and all that stuff. Is it because they say, well, the Uyghurs are some kind of genetically inferior thing and they're going to pollute our society and our culture with their degenerate lineage and thus will kind of attack our purity? Or is it that they're like, well, these Uyghurs are, Muslim, and they have ideas that kind of will take away from the socialist utopia of the classless society that we necessarily want to have. So they might frame it. So they could, and by the way, they could very well frame it in a kind of leftist way, but then the implementation and the actual policy that they're advocating under could not have anything to do with leftism whatsoever.
I saw a documentary where these journalists tried to go in and discover what was going on with the Uyghur genocide, and they talked to this lady on the train, and she was talking about how she was basically a mouthpiece for the state, and she was talking about how the state had to do what they were doing to the Uyghurs because they were a bunch of troublemakers, and they were basically like rabble rousers that were going against the culture.
Sure, but that doesn't
it's just
really
one
tell
lady
us...
on a train. So, but
right,
I mean, it does go with that narrative that you're bringing up.
But that doesn't really, that could be both a left or right wing. That doesn't really tell us anything about the direction of the politics.
Well, establishment versus anti-establishment, couldn't that be a metric? Well, like where would you put well, I guess right now the right is completely anti-establishment.
Right. Yeah. So no, I don't think.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I always think of the left as the anti-establishments. Now all of a sudden, the
nope,
right is
yeah.
just as much anti-establishment. I guess if the establishment is really fucking everyone over, everyone becomes anti-establishment, right? Left, right, and center.
Well, it like again, so it's like you think of like, oh, the left is anti-establishment because they want to like tear down established order and hierarchy. But then once the establishment becomes socialist, is it
Right.
left wing to be? And it's funny because a lot of socialists have actually grappled with this very question. They say, if you have a socialist country, does it inherently become right wing because all those socialist institutions become the normative institutions of the country?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't think that's necessarily a useful conception of the left-right dichotomy. Malik for $5 says is a right-wing position. It's a right-wing position co-opted by left-wing actors. That's definitely possible. And Antelope for $2 says based and gift pilled J-maxing. There you go.
Oh yeah.
Twitter sucks for another $5. Thank you. Says I identify as right wing because of my conservative values. How dare you say I'm a libertarian? Really? I thought you were a libertarian.
Wow.
I take it back. I apologize. Okay.
Interesting.
Toxic Mix for $20. Thank you so much. Says I wouldn't say Sitch's right versus left analogy works perfectly when considering Asian immigrants. You could say as a right winger, I prefer Asians keep their culture so the men work harder and the women are less cringe. We'll see. Yeah, I was kind of using it in a general way, but that's because you're viewing American culture as becoming too left wing and you're viewing Asian culture as more right wing. So you want them to,
keep
maintain
the right-wing
their
culture.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, I understand what you're saying. That's fair. Christian Baller for $5 says, honestly, the whole left versus right dynamic has outlived its usefulness, in my opinion. Just ask people their positions without assigning them a side. I mean, I think this thing is actually significantly more complicated than we tend to ascribe it to, this left-right dichotomy. And so in practice, it is generally more useful to just ask people their positions.
It is, but so much of this game is pinning someone as the other.
Yes.
That's what people are trying to do. So
yes. Side Story 8 for $7. Thank you so much for the 7 Canadian. Old School for 17 months says, I just popped in. Why are you trying to dimensionally reduce multidimensional politics into a 2D right-left spectrum? Well, obviously you can't do that with everything, but I do believe there's a underlying moral intuition that seems to broadly break down into 3 classifications of right, left, and libertarian. So
yeah, and I'm not doing 2D. I'm going like 60. So
there you go. AKA Batosai for $2 says Adam Sargon is about John Locke, not John Rawls. I could have swore he brought up Rawls, or somebody brought up Rawls.
It was Rousseau, I think. I got caught up on the R's.
No. Yeah, he brings up Rousseau, and maybe it wasn't Karl. I know I've heard people that argue against liberalism bring up Rawls a bunch too. So that's not like so even if Karl hasn't brought it up, I know we've listened to a conversation where people arguing against liberalism bring up Rawls a lot as well. So.
Okay.
Sella for $5 says, whatever is said in this debate is smarter than Cinema Roberto's definition of conservatives versus liberals. Conservative means small, liberal means big, like salt. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, a lot of those takes are bad.
Sick Fox, thank you so much for the £10. Says there's no inherent contradiction. Whoops. There's no inherent contradiction between social conservatism and libertarianism. Many hold to both. There are a variety of means to achieve cultural ends without violating the NAP or property rights. So I know that someone could be a libertarian in the terms of kind of like what Hicks was talking about in the debate, where he's saying, well, you could just be libertarian and say, I just don't think the government should have any sway on this stuff, but I'm a social conservative in my personal life. Like, I understand people can hold that position. I'm curious, and I wonder if that same person existed in a society where the government, had the same social values. I'm a little skeptical that they'd still be like a libertarian at that point. And maybe that's just my own cynical belief, but.
You You think they'd adopt government power with a little too much zeal?
Well, it's because it's easy. Like the way to kind of conceptualize this when we talk about like libertarian versus non-libertarian, whatever. Like if you have a belief in a strong social conservative moral values, okay, and you believe in a libertarian values from the government, you have to remember, you don't live in a vacuum. And this always comes into play when people have children. Like before you have children, it maybe doesn't matter. But when you have children, you suddenly see how the rest of society and the cultural values of society in school, yes, starts to influence your children. I think this is why a lot of people become more conservative as they have children. Like they start to see like, oh, all these forces outside of my control are influencing my children and their cultural values. Right.
They're fucking them up.
Exactly. And so if you're socially conservative, it just makes sense that you'd want the rest of society to be socially conservative so that your child would be more likely to adopt your socially conservative values.
Right.
So, Twitter sucks for $2 says I read that one. My main point of private property is right wing. Suck for $5 says, so I got sick recently and I had swollen lymph node glands and they took a throat culture for test. Turns out it was a monoculture.
Ooh.
There you go. Thank you, Stug. Mads for 50 DK dollars says the right is pro free market, the greatest engine for change. How do you explain that? Also read Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions.
Well, I have read that. It's a great book.
Yeah, I read that. So I think the right is pro free market. That's kind of too complicated to get into. I don't think the right is pro free market for an ideological reason. I'll just leave it at that. I mean, we'll come back to this. So,
but what you're saying is exactly correct. It is the greatest engine for change and for creating prosperity for the most people.
100%. I agree. Yeah. J-Mac, our second follower, thanks so much for the $100. Thank you.
Very generous.
Says, I highly recommend Dev's video. I usually hate drama content, but it was so well put together. I think it highlighted a lot of underlying psychology that has infected current day discourse, relationships, and canceling. The cringe is palpable, but in the best way.
We'll have to check it out. Yeah, I think I might have already watched this video because I do like the drama video. So,
right. Unagi for $5 says, I like this conversation because it was interesting to see what people viewed as left and or right wing. Yeah, I think it's always very interesting. So that was a very good conversation.
Always
so thanks
all over
for
the place.
For coming on. And it was all over the place. And thanks, Dev, for coming on too. Solidoge for $2 says, y'all's conception of the U.S. Revolution is off. We know the founders had no misconceptions about the king's limited power. Their grievance was with the houses who had an unelected representatives for the U.S. The king hate was propaganda. Interesting. I didn't know that. Dr. Diller for $2 says, I don't see the utility in discussing whether the Nazis were left or right wing. They supported selective socialism. They took up fascism, which is an outgrowth of socialism. They were avowed nationalists. It's a wash. I mean, I think when it comes to this conversation of Nazis, it is what you're saying, Adam. Like, it's just both sides. Well, there's some utility to it and there's some not utility. There's not utility because it, again, is just people trying to attack the other side.
Right.
Essentially,
that's where there is no utility.
Right.
Well,
I think
aside from the bad utility.
Exactly. I think the utility is that I feel like a lot of people on the right who say the Nazis are left wing, they're doing this weird thing. Some of them, not everyone, but they're doing this weird thing where they're saying, well, the Nazis are right wing. So all this shows is that there's no limit to going too far right. They keep saying, it's kind of like this idea like, oh, the government society should just go as far right as possible because there's never any danger to it. And I just think that that's fundamentally not true. I do think we need to kind of be balanced and exist in the, more moderate center realm. So that's kind of why I think there is utility and pushback against this idea of like, oh, there's no danger to the far right, all the problematic societies that have ever existed in society are all far left. So
I think that might be the first show that we ever did was doing that Jordan Peterson debate. And didn't he ask Michael Eric Dyson when the left can go too far? And he said, well, when does the right go too far? And he's like, Nazis, obviously.
Yes,
Jordan Peterson said this. He did.
That is true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, it's because go
ahead.
Oh, no, because Jordan Peterson says the same thing that I agree with. He says, when you look at the Nazis and the the language that they use, what do they always talk about? They talk about degeneration, disgust, and purity. And these are all things that trigger right-wing moral intuitions and that left-wing people don't give a fuck about.
Right. Yeah.
So he's kind of looking at it from a psychological perspective.
And that debate is totally interesting because he is trying to frame around how we know when the left is going too far. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Fondue for $5 says, did we also forget how the Libertarian Party is basically full left-wing now? That's true. We did forget that. Yeah. The left-wing National Party elected a very left-wing person. So, or left-wing social person, I should say.
Yeah. Who do you think that person is going to take votes away from? Trump or Biden?
You would assume. Well, I don't know, actually. You'd assume Biden, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I'm assuming that the libertarian guy who's socially left-wing, he's still economically libertarian. He's still, you know, it's like the government's too big. People should be able to do whatever the fuck they want. You know, businesses should be able to do whatever the fuck they want. And I don't know who that's going to necessarily take votes away from.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But just optically, they're like, oh, look, finally, a gay guy I can vote for.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, enough of this tomfoolery.
Well, thank you all so much for all the very generous super chats. Thank you, Twitter Sucks, and Dev for coming on. It was a very awesome conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll talk to Dev again. And I'm sure we'll probably talk to Twitter Sucks again sometime.
Yes.
So, all right.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, everybody.